Ladies and gentlemen, may I please have your attention? May I kindly request that we come down to fill up these chairs so that we are able to start. Please. Please come down to fill up these chairs. There are about 20 or so chairs down here. If you can please come and fill them up. Thank you very much for your cooperation. There is a challenge with regards sign language interpretation and our disabilities side, that side. Would you kindly just be aware that we are not supposed to move in front of them, so that because they are looking at the sign language interpreter there, if you can just listen the movement on that side. Thank you very much. We still need some more warm bodies on these chairs. Please come down. Can I please request the gentleman there, that side in the front there, for you to please come down? Please. Thank you very much. There are other chairs that side. Thank you very much. Hello, Daddy. No, don't go that one today. You can still come down. Come down here. There are chairs this side, in the front. Thank you so much for your cooperation. Thanks. Again, another announcement is that we are going to be live on Parliamentary Channel. So hence we also asked these handsome and beautiful faces to come to the fore so that we fill in the space. Thank you very much. We are still expecting maybe 5, 10 people here. Thank you so much, and please mind the side, the disability side, not to move up and down.
Can't push further. You can't put this there.
Bubuza le bungabuza ibox wena.
I was asking the box.
Oh, le yanyakaza le lehla songabe esedelo. Cala ke ngiyakutetela.
Sanibonani. Good morning. Sanibonani. Nivuka njani kodwa? Siyabonga. We are starting with our program now. My name is Tulani Chefuta. I will be the program director for today. I want to announce that Sine facility interpretation Sine channel 1 ukhuluma isilungu isingisi, channel 2 isiZulu, channel 3 isiSotho, channel 4 Afrikaans, channel 5 isiXhosa. So we also expect that a person can express him or herself in any language. So that's zokhona ukuthi sizwane kahle. As we start the program, I want to introduce the high-level panel that is convening this public hearing and start by introducing our leader, the chairperson of the high-level panel, President Kgalema Motlhande. Let's welcome him. We also have as one of the panel members, Professor Rilebohile Moletsane. Next to her is Reverend Malcolm Damon. We're also joined by Professor Yvonne Muthian. We also have Dr. Olive Shisana. We're also joined by Dr. Terence Nombembe. We also have Dr. Annika Klassen. And of course, myself. At this stage, we are going to go straight and invite the chairperson of the high-level panel to come and address us. Over to you, Mkulu.
Sanibonani. Yeah. Masizibongele ukuthi silapha eThekwini, the city of two seasons, summer and summer. Nokuthi hayi siphathwe kahle, sifika izolo la sileli phezu kwamagagasi izolo ebusuku, so sivuka sizizwa siumqemane namhlanje, sinamandla. But mine really is to explain where the high-level panel comes from. The high-level panel was appointed by the Speakers Forum, all speakers from the National Assembly and all other legislatures throughout the provinces. And the reason for establishing this high-level panel could be found in the legacy report of the 4th Parliament, because the Fourth Parliament decided that, or identified the need to pause and assess impact of legislation on four key focus areas. The first of these focus areas being the poverty, unemployment, and inequality. And the second focus area is creation of an equitable distribution of wealth. And the third area is the land question in terms of redistribution, the security of tenure, land reform, and all of that. And the fourth area is nation building and social cohesion. So the panel is made up of 17 members, and in our very first meeting, we decided that the first two areas of focus, which is poverty, unemployment, and inequality, as well as the second area of focus, dealing with the creation of an equitable distribution of wealth, are so closely interlinked and governed by more or less the same pieces of legislation. And if you follow the logic of causality and effect, we found that these two are very closely linked in that sense. And so we divided ourselves into three working groups. The first working group deals with the first two areas of focus. And the second working group focuses on the land question. And the last and third working group focuses on nation building and social cohesion. And so the method that we use is really to call for submissions from stakeholders, written submissions. So many research organizations and organized formations from civic society, organized business, organized agriculture, organized trade unions, and all of that have all made submissions. And we also interact with reports of Chapter 9 institutions. We also engaged with Chapter 9 institutions. We also interact with researchers based in a number of universities across the length and breadth of the country. And so we felt that over and above all of that, we've got to have a program of outreach to go to all provinces and hear from our people as to how they are impacted upon by legislation or absence of legislation. And in certain instances, people may feel that we have too many laws that only serves to complicate their lives and retard their potential to improve the quality of their lives. And so we want to hear from yourselves what your lived experience tells you, and whether there's need for crafting of new legislation or to reduce existing legislation and so on. And that is why we are here. And we follow a simple natural ratio of 2:1. So we will listen more than we will talk, because we have 2 ears, 1 mouth. And so we think we must listen to you. We want you to be free and candid with us, without buying face, without any favor. You just tell us how your experience is shaped by existing legislation or absence thereof. So we hope that we will be able to have a very productive day today, and we are all ears. We're here to really truly listen to you. And so don't be intimidated by the constraint of language. Just state your own experience as eloquently as you possibly can. What we will plead for is that it is helpful, given the fact that there's a whole lot of people who are here to participate in this process, that it would be very helpful if you go really to the nub of the problem, the issue, without preambles, without any perorations, just go straight to the point and hit at it, you know, as eloquently and as forcefully as you possibly can. The program that we are going to follow this morning is that, you know, from our side, where, as I explained, we have 3 working groups. So we are going to receive presentations which really sum up the framework within which we do this work from my colleagues in the panel. And the 3 presentations will be delivered by a member of each working group. So there will be a presentation on nation building and social cohesion. There will be a presentation on the issues of poverty, inequality, and unemployment, and creation of wealth and distribution thereof. And there will be a presentation on the land question. Thereafter, we will then invite you know, people from the floor to give their own accounts of how the law impacts on their lives. I hope that is in order, and because we are quite mindful of the fact that we were delayed by the registration process, we think we should get straight into the business of today. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Chairperson of the high-level panel. Now, picking up from what the Chairperson was saying, we have 3 presentations that will be made. Our suggestion was that we take them back to back so that we have the whole day dedicated to the discussions. And in that regard, then, I shall invite the first speaker who will present to us on the theme of nation building, which is under Working Group 3, which presentation will be made by Professor Yvonne Muthian. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you, Chairperson, and good morning and most welcome to all of you. We are particularly pleased that so many people are taking our citizenship seriously and sharing with us all the issues and challenges that you face as the country implements its legislation. So to start off with, let us look at what we mean by social cohesion and nation building by turning to the preamble of our Constitution. Our Constitution enjoins us, and I read, to heal the divisions of the past and establish a society based on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights, to lay the foundations for a democratic and open society in which government is based on the will of the people and every citizen is equally protected by the law, to improve the quality of life of all citizens and free the potential of each person and build a united and democratic South Africa in the family of nations. And this is very important as we remind ourselves when we set out to create a new nation, a new democratic nation of South Africa. In this working group, we ask for your input on the issues that divide us and the issues that bind us. And we take note that after 22 years of democracy, we still have challenges of social cohesion and nation building because we have ethnic-based conflict, which is very high and still continues. We have tensions with foreign communities that are living in our midst. There continues to be domestic abuse and gender-based violence, and we continue to be divided by race and class. So in turning then to the first pillar of our working group, i.e. social cohesion, we then ask ourselves the question, what is it that binds us as a community? Question, what is it that divides us as a community? And we take note that practices found in the laws, customs, traditions, practices among us as a people can either serve to divide us or it can serve to bind us. And those are the things that we'd like you to reflect on and to share with us. So specifically, we'd like you to tell us which of those customs and practices either divide us as communities or which of those customs and practices build us as communities. And here we're thinking particularly around solidarity created by social organizations like churches and NGOs, and share your experience in terms of what you are doing to help us build our new nation, or what others may be doing to divide us as a nation. We then ask ourselves the question as well, what policies in government or in municipalities at our local government level do we see that either divide us or bind us as a community? For example, the question is, are we all treated equally? Do the programs that are intended to improve the quality of our lives, including the delivery of health services, education, food, water, and electricity, housing, and safety, do we all enjoy this equally? And if not, how can we build a nation if we do not all have equal access to opportunities? Turning then to the pillar of nation building, we ask ourselves the question, what is it that binds us as a nation? So we move from the community level of social cohesion to the country. And what is it that binds us as the nation that helps us to live out that promise in the Constitution? We say that the common vision, values, traditions, and customs and practices can help to build us as a diverse South African nation as promised in the Constitution. And that notion that creates national pride, including those aspects, sport, cultural events, our national symbols, our national holidays. Is that enough? Is that the glue that binds us and builds a new South African nation, or are we not making or living up to that promise? So here we'd like you to reflect on which of the laws in our country assist us in uniting us, or which of those laws continue to divide us as communities and as a nation, and also looking at the policies of government or local government or municipalities, which of those policies at a local level either bind us or continue to divide us as communities and nations. And we'd also like you to reflect on the role that parliaments, either provincial parliament or national parliament, should play in building us as communities and as a nation, as we are a parliamentary panel looking at the laws of the country passed over the last 20 years. To conclude, as we start our reflection on social cohesion and nation building, it is worthwhile for us to remember the words of the founding father of our democracy, the late President Nelson Mandela, when he says, "No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin, or his background, or his religion. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite." And we look forward to your inputs. I thank you.
Sanbonani. So I'm going to talk about the inputs that we hope you're going to give us about land, and to say that we want to focus really on 3 aspects of land. So we want to find out from you whether the current policies of government and the current laws of government deliver the rights that are set out in the Constitution. The Constitution sets out a right of equal access, equitable access to land. It sets out a right to restitution for people who lost their land, and it sets out a right to security of tenure, whether on the farms, in the communal areas, or in the shacklands around the cities. So are current laws and policies delivering those rights? The second question is, are current policies and laws delivering in relation to racial inequality and the legacy of massive racial inequality in relation to land that we inherited from colonialism and apartheid? And the third question really is, are current policies and laws addressing the legacy of poverty and dispossession that we inherited from colonialism and apartheid? And we hope that through examples and stories that you tell us about your experiences, you can help us answer those questions. Is current policy and law delivering the rights in the Constitution? Is it addressing the history of racial inequality? And is it addressing the legacy of deep poverty and dispossession? The scope of our work includes looking at the social, economic, and political significance of the land question. It focuses on land redistribution, which is the Provision of Land and Assistance Act and the Communal Property Associations Act. How are those working? It focuses on land tenure reform, whether on the farms or in the communal areas or in the shacklands around the cities. We look too at the communal areas and the links between tenure reform legislation and other legislation, for example, the Traditional Leadership and Governance Framework Act and the Mineral and Petroleum Development Resources Act, and how are all those laws working? Are they making people more secure, or are they making people less secure? Then we look at land restitution, people who've laid claims to land that they were forcibly removed from. How is that working in your experience? And then we look at agrarian reform and rural development. When people get land, how are they managing to farm that land? How is the land actually being used? And in particular, we want to look at whether the land reform laws address the legacy we inherited from apartheid of massive inequality between the former homelands and the rest of South Africa, and between the shacklands around the cities and people who live in the cities. So we're really hoping that people can talk about their experience with land redistribution and restitution. And on whether government policies are working and what your experience is. We'd like you to give us facts about whether land reform and restitution programs have worked, and to hand up any written submissions that would complement your oral submissions. And then we draw your attention to Section 25(6) of the Constitution, which promises that a law will be introduced to ensure that people who are insecure because of past racial discrimination must either get tenure security or they must get compensation if they were put on top of someone else's land. So we hope that people will talk about tenure rights on the farms, the problems facing labor tenants, whether people are secure in communal areas and in urban areas. And we also encourage you to refer to any other laws that may be actually undermining your right to land reform. So going to high-level questions for land reform, we ask, in what way has the implementation of different post-1994 land laws assisted or inhibited land redistribution and restitution? Have these laws been successful in addressing the legacy of racial discrimination? What improvements would you suggest if they haven't been successful? Have the post-apartheid laws helped to address the problems of poverty and inequality in relation to access to land? If so, how so? If not, how not? What changes are necessary? We hope that you will be able to make suggestions to us that we can include in our recommendations to Parliament. Have the tenure reform laws been successful in stopping evictions and giving people legally enforceable rights? Has that worked for labor tenants? Has it worked for people living on the farms? And again, if it's worked, what worked? If it didn't work, what isn't working? Have recent laws and policies enabled black farmers to use the land productively and to become successful farmers? And has land reform provided support to different groups and communities who got land through land reform? How has it impacted on people's livelihoods? And finally, what are the strengths and gaps that you see in current law and policy? And how should Parliament address the gaps? So we're hoping that you're going to come forward with many case studies and examples and suggestions and proposals. Thank you.
Sanibonani nonke. Okay, I'm going to be talking about Working Group 1, which is going to be looking at the whole area of growth, poverty, and inequality. And under that, we have a number of areas that we are studying, which is the wage inequality, the wealth distribution and inequality, the labor regulatory environment, as well as unemployment and poverty and access to basic services. And the second big area that we'll be looking at is unequal access to quality health care, and also the question of quality education, spatial inequality, and finally we'll be looking at the question of skills development. The next slide addresses the question of national statistics insofar as employment situation is concerned. And it looks at official unemployment as well as expanded unemployment. Looking on, a quarter of our people, as we've indicated, cannot find a job. 65.3% of those that were unemployed have been unemployed for more than a year. So this is a long-term problem. And of those that are unemployed, the overwhelming majority, that is 71% of those, are youth aged 15 to 34. And 44% of those that were unemployed have never been employed before. So they are not in business, they are not working, they are struggling to make ends meet. Furthermore, I just want to say that a third, that's about 33% of the 15 to 24-year-old were not in employment, they were not going through educational system, or they were not going through a training program. And so that is a big problem. Now, the next slide tells us about the inequalities that continue to exist in terms of income. The measure that we're using here is annual household income, and we look at it for the different racial groups. And the data comes in from the census for 2011, as well as data earlier on for 2001 that was collected, census for 2001. And we can see from that slide who is actually having more money coming into their household. The white population has got more money, and that has grown from 2001 to 2011. The black population, although they've doubled, or more than tripled actually, close to more than tripled, they are starting from a very low base of 22,522 in 2001 to 60,613. But if you compare it across the races, you do see that the majority of the population of this country still does not have access to that income they need to improve their life. The next slide is looking at spatial inequality. These slides obviously were taken from an aeroplane, looking either through Google Map or whatever, or satellite, and when they look at it, you can see very clearly that the majority of the people who are suffering are really crammed in a very tiny, tiny place. And for those that have got resources, have got plenty of space. And that you see in Alexander versus Wynberg, or Alexander versus Casey Park, or if you go to the Cape Town, you look at Hout Bay and Imzamuyet. Two different worlds. They don't look like they are living in the same country. So these are the spatial inequalities that we're actually looking at, and these are the legacies of apartheid that we're dealing with. And we're looking at them 22 years down the line, and we're saying, what is it we need to do in terms of laws to actually change them? Because if we're going to talk about social cohesion of those communities, it implies that we must actually end the spatial inequalities so that people can feel that they are part and parcel of one country, South Africa. So we come to the next slide and we look at the laws. What laws actually frame the equality debate? Well, we start with our Constitution. We've heard earlier on that the Constitution, is, the supreme law of the land. And the Constitution indicates that there is a right of equality that cannot be violated under any circumstances. In other words, equality is listed as a non-derogable right, that is, the right that really every South African ought to have. And to give effect, essentially, to this constitutional imperative, there is a legislative framework that underpins all of this, and that is the Law of Unfair Discrimination Act, the PEDUDA, and the Employment Equity Act. So prevention of this discrimination and as well as Employment Equity Act are facilitated by several instruments. The first one that you know about is the South African Human Rights Commission, and we also have the Commission for Gender Equality. We have the Commission for Employment Equity and the Equality Courts. All of these instruments are supposed to be ensuring that the Constitution is actually implemented insofar as the question of equality. The next slide shows that, unfortunately, there's still persistent inequality, and it's manifesting itself on the basis of class, on the basis of race, as well as on the basis of gender. If we look at the data coming in from the World Bank, people looking from outside, globally looking at South Africa, they find that the top 10% of the South African population takes over 58% of the country's income. 10%, 58%. While the bottom 50% take about 8% of the income that is available. So you can see these massive inequalities that are continuing in our country. And when you look at it in terms of who earns what, of course, the executive directors in South Africa earn 21 times more than, the average employee in our country. And if you were to take into account the bonuses that they get at the end of the year, especially for casualizing the labor, you find that it jumps to about 36% when that bonus is actually added. Now, the next slide is looking at the employment equity legislation. This legislation aims to achieve equity in the workplace, and that is the Employment Equity Act of 55 of 1998. It aims to promote equal opportunity and fair treatment in employment through the elimination of unfair discrimination. And it also implements affirmative action in order to redress the disadvantage in employment. Some people argue that affirmative action is discriminatory, but what it does, it tries to correct the discrimination that existed under apartheid by ensuring that at the workplace there are opportunities, for everyone, including those people that were disadvantaged before. Then we've got the next law that we need to look at, that is the Commission for Employment Equity. That Commission for Employment Equity, it comes out of the law that I've talked about. It's a statutory body. It's established to monitor the implementation of employment equity. And in addition to that, it advises the minister. So here is a report that came out, the 16th report that has come out, this year. It came out around April, and it shows that there are still major problems in the sense that in terms of top management positions, the whites occupy 69% of the positions, which is more than 6 times their economic active population, and the Africans occupy 14.3%, and the colors 4.7%, and both of them are actually underrepresented. So these are some of the challenges that we have. The other challenge that they list there is the question of the disabled people. Here we are seeing a decrease in the representation of people who are disabled in terms of employment. On the next slide, we look at the laws that were passed to address inequality in the workplace. Unfortunately, when it comes to promotions, we see the same trend as we have seen before, that the bulk of the promotions are occurring in the white population at 55%. For the Africans, it's 22%. And for the Asians, Indians, they are overrepresented when it comes to that. When it comes to the question of the foreigners, they take a small chunk of about 3.6% in terms of promotions. So the inequalities are continuing in a number of ways. So we come into the next slide, which is basically looking at the skills gap. We have got massive gaps in skills in our country. If you look at the data that we have, between the whites and blacks, and I've simplified this by just taking the two groups, and the issue could be addressed also for the colored population and so forth. If you look at the data for 1994 and you compare that to 2014, over that period, Africans have just increased their skills base by about 3% only. In the white population, they've increased it by 19%. So clearly the gap is widening. Things are not getting better. They are getting worse in terms of skills, despite the fact that we've got so many SETAs that have been set up in our country. So we need to be looking at what legislation we need to be putting in place in order to improve this issue on the skills. But the skills are also related to the question of education. So the next slide is looking at the question of education. And the Constitution is very clear on this, and I quote, "Everyone has a right to basic education, including adult basic education, and to further education, which the state through reasonable measures must make progressively available and accessible." And that is chapter 2 of the Bill of Rights. Now we see the national unrest in the country. People are concerned, the students are concerned, the parents are concerned. The students are demanding free education, and no fee increases. They are demanding this because they've seen it in the Constitution. They want to have free education, but at the same time, the government is saying that free education should be made available to all those who come from families earning more than 600,000 rand per year. And they're a small group, those people who earn more than 600,000 a year. Some are arguing that this is progressive realization of this right, and others are saying, no, it's not fast enough. So the debate is going on. So should there be a law that require, for example, the prepayment for quality education for all, similar to those that exist in other countries with regard to national health insurance, where it's based on a prepayment system? We need to be looking at those issues and see, are these possible solutions that we should be addressing? Now, education is good to have and have all these universities, but we also have to look at the quality education, which is one of the things that the students are really raising as a concern. So the next slide is really addressing some of those issues on the throughput rates. If you look at the data that comes in from the Council of Higher Education in 2013, and also the Human Science Research Council, which has looked at the skills development report, they say a quarter of students who are in contact universities, in other words, where they go in and they're taught in a classroom, the graduation rate is very, very low. People don't complete within the time frame that's required. If a degree is 3 years, they don't complete in 3 years. They complete in more years, meaning that more people are not able to come into the university because the others are still in the system. And if you look at the completion rates by the areas that grow the economy, that would help us to reduce, poverty. And you find that the situation is even, it's bad. Bachelors of Engineering, only 23% of them completed. In other words, those who went into the program, only 23% of them completed. Bachelor of Science, the same percentage. Engineering diploma, worse, 5%. Science diploma, 14%. 4-year commerce degree, 26%. So what is happening is that the quality of our education is not very good, and it just doesn't start at a university level. This next slide is basically showing that it starts very much at an early level. We look at that slide, which actually gives us information about, are the grade 3 students performing at the appropriate level of grade 3? Do they get, for example, just 50% of their marks? Do they get 50%? And they find that if you look at it according to the poverty levels, in terms of the quintile levels, the things are not looking good. The poorer you are, the less likely are you to actually perform at that level. In fact, only 10% of them are performing at the level of grade 3. Now, you can imagine what's going to happen, as they come into the university. The same problems that you have seen at the primary care level, you are going to see them at the university level. So the issue is we have to look at education comprehensively. The next slide is basically showing that 16%, of all of those people that have started their grade 3rd degree education are actually operating at that particular level. Now, I'm coming to the issue of health insurance, which might be one mechanism, which is the next slide, please, which might be one mechanism to reduce inequality. First, we want to address the question of, can the national health insurance eliminate disparities in financing the public and private healthcare system? You all know that about 8.5% of our GDP is actually spent on health in South Africa. Half of that is actually spent on between 16 and 20% of the population. That is those that have. The rest of the 84%, or 80 to 84% have to really, use the limited amount of resources that are available. Hence, the quality of the healthcare system is not good because the public healthcare system is underfunded, it's undercapacitated, and it lacks sufficient infrastructure in order to provide healthcare to the majority of the population who are poor. The private sector is well-resourced, and as I've indicated, but also we should look at the question of, can national health insurance help? The white paper on national health insurance says the NHI is also based on the principle of social solidarity. That implies cross-subsidization of the poor by the well-off, the old by the young, and the sick by the healthy. Given the history of this country of racial divides and which is currently experiencing socio-economic divides, it's necessary that the national health insurance be based on this principle of solidarity in order to promote social cohesion. So we can indeed find a solution that brings us all together by introducing national health insurance in the country and rolling it out. The next point that I would like to look at is still the question of NHI being probably able to significantly reduce inequality, because the poor tend to postpone seeking needed health care, while the rich tend to overuse those services. So you've got these imbalances in our system. The affluent 20% receive 36% of the healthcare benefits, while their need is only 10%. The poorest 20% receive only 13% of the healthcare benefits, while they have a greater need of about 25%. So free healthcare at the point of care for all is going to end these disparities. The next slide tells us that South Africa does need a national health insurance that is based on a single payer model that integrates the public and private health sector and provides universal coverage regardless of the ability to pay, regardless of the race of the person, of the age, the sex, as well as geographic location. South Africa needs a healthcare system that is fair and sustainable, and the current model is not. And that, a lot of that comes in from the white paper on our national health insurance. We do need legislation to introduce NHI that is going to reduce inequality. Now I want to ask you some questions that we would like you to answer. We want you to look at which laws should be amended in order to promote employment. We need to look at the laws. Which ones do you suggest should be amended or written in order to reduce these inequalities that we're seeing? We want you to tell us which laws should be amended or prepared to enable equitable distribution of wealth in our country. We want you to help us to understand whether there are any laws that should be amended or developed to reduce spatial inequality. That is an inequality of space, of living spaces that were created by the apartheid system. And then which laws should be written to improve access to quality free health care as well as education at the point of service. I'd like to thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all the presenters. That marks the end of inputs that will be coming from the high-level panel. All the time now is dedicated to the discussions. But we will try and help structure the discussions according to the working groups that presented. But before we take on discussions, I want to announce that the earphones with interpretation devices are available at the foyer, so we can access those from now, so that we move together throughout the process. The second thing I want to announce is that as presentations were made, I saw many people taking notes, and that we are glad to accept even some of those into any of our tables, so that they constitute part of what we will look into long after we shall have finished the public hearing itself. At this stage, we are going to start by inviting stakeholders and organizations that confirmed wanting to make submissions on the discussions. I want to start by inviting the Vice Chairperson of Kwazulu-Natal Civil Society Organizations Coalition, Mr. Paul Kariukwi. Mr. Paul, you are welcome. Mr. Paul, you have 5 minutes. Mr. Paul, when you see me standing, that should signal something to you. And we are not trying to terminate the inputs that people will be making, but people can just raise the most important issues and still give us the submission, as I see you have a written submission. So that will apply to all other presenters. Thank you very much.
Colleagues, good morning. From the Civil Society Coalition in the province, our submissions are actually on two main areas. The first one is on the working group number 1 on issues relating to inequality, poverty, and unemployment. We feel that their laws have been established that have been so good so far to create some normalcy in the situation. For example, the introduction of social grants that have contributed to arresting the frontiers of poverty. We're also seeing the gradual increase in the age of beneficiaries from 18 years and above being cushioned and protected, especially those from poor families. However, we feel that there are some negative impacts of these laws, especially where social grants are concerned, that are still contributing to the situation that is present at the moment without necessarily reducing the impact of poverty to those families that are affected. We feel there is no clearly defined exit plan for beneficiaries who have reached a certain age or are now actually gaining full-time employment. What is also even more worrying is corruption that is taking place in certain departments that are designated to handle these grants. And we feel that from our point of view, from the civil society sector, we are not seeing enough impetus from government to really arrest the perpetrators and those who are involved in such. We're also seeing that we have a view that there is also, the social grants are creating some kind of dependency syndromes, really not really correcting the situation as it should be done or envisioned by the legislation. So our proposition, what we think should be done, we feel that Social Assistance Act 59 of 1992 should be reviewed to reflect the current socioeconomic conditions in the country. We also want to say that the basic income grant on the part of government should be done on the possibility of an income grant so that it can also be used to enhance aspects such as skills development on those part of population that is very poor and is not very much cushioned to the economic shocks that we're currently experiencing. We are also proposing that the government should consider providing food coupons to these poor families, especially in the rural areas, and be made available at government warehouses and supermarkets if that's possible, with a coordinated effort from the government departments. At the same time, we're also asking that there should be a focus on the informal economy, especially cooperatives and small, medium, and micro enterprises, to create job opportunities next to areas where people live. And lastly, we're also saying that the National Empowerment Fund should be, National Empowerment Fund Act should be reviewed so that it can make funding more easily accessible to SMMEs and cooperatives, especially in the rural areas. We feel that the government has done some work towards this direction, but it's not sufficient enough to move majority of our poor population into places of economic advantage. And we're also asking if the government would consider a wealth distribution and inequality kind of a tax, proposing that the Income Tax Act 58 of 1962 should be buttressed by other legislation. We feel that the wealth tax that was proposed prior to 1994 should be revisited, and a law should be developed that will regulate the taxation of the rich to subsidize development programs for the poor and previously marginalized. We believe that this act should also aim at bridging the gap between the rich and the poor and arrest the outflow of and siphoning of capital offshore. We believe also that the Cooperatives Act 14 of 2005 should also be reviewed. Our view is that the current model of cooperatives, as espoused in the Cooperative Act, is neither feasible nor sustainable, especially established by the marginalized Black African people. The emphasis is more on the business aspects of cooperatives rather than on the social entrepreneurship, community development. We feel that the number of people starting a cooperative should be increased so that more people could benefit. Alternatively, 2 or 3 types of cooperatives should be considered in order to accommodate the needs of different groups. I thank you.
Exactly 4 minutes. Thank you very much. Well, we have been to Eastern Cape on these public hearings. We have been to Northern Cape. We have been to Free State, and now we're in KZN. And the experience is that they keep improving with every province we go to. So at this rate, it seems that KZN is going to be the best. Thank you very much for that. That's a model that all other presenters should follow. Please don't forget to share the actual presentation with us. May I now invite a presenter from Kwazulu-Natal Business Council of Chambers. In this list, I have the chairman of the chambers, Dominic Collett. Not here. May I invite a speaker from the South African Medical Association, the KZN chapter. Siyahamba njalo. A representative from NAFCOC. Oh, kancane ngicela Siswe Medical Association. Thank you very much. You are welcome. Please come and join me here. Your 5 minutes start.
It's still good morning, ma'am. Thank you. We would just like to send our appreciation for the invitation on behalf of the South African Medical Association. We take this panel very seriously, so we will be joining you guys in Joburg. I think we'd like to come back and give you guys a more consolidated input. There's quite a couple of legislations that I think we need to address. I will just now come to this issue of NHI because it's important, I think, for us as medical professionals. I feel that, or as an organization, we need to sit back. We went through the white paper and there's a few areas of concern. There was trial GP contracting, which didn't work. You come back, now those very GPs are now coming back and having to find a way of being reabsorbed into public sector. It's one of the considerations you're going to have to make. I feel like costing, when it comes to that, is a critical issue. Look at what is being put in the media now with regards to overtime for doctors. And you're now going to want to extend it to do GP contracting. You also have this thing of saying we're going to provide basic services. What is the package of care that you're going to be able to afford to provide? Because people mustn't think that it's going to be everything. That needs to be negotiated with the stakeholders to say, what is the standard package we're going to be able to provide? You also need to look at the funding of this. As stands, it looks like majority of the funding is going to come from your public sector employees. Have you looked at the private sector and go to how are they coming into the party? So those are just a couple of the issues that are fundamental into making sure that the NHI is implementable. You talk about geography. Private sector is still mainly in metropoles. How then is this absorption going to also help with the redistribution to your poor population in the outlying areas that don't have those facilities in the first place? So that's why we feel that maybe government needs to come back to the table, bring back other stakeholders, because healthcare, it's a right. I think we've been looking at it as a budgeting issue, but it's a fundamental human right. And without it, you have no population to speak of that can contribute to economic development. Thank you.
Yes, Wagal. May we invite the provincial secretary of, no, NAFCOC.
Angibonge kakhulu kubahlonishwa abakhona angizukubala ngezikhundla nokulingana kwethu kodwa nonke ngiyanibingelela siNAFCOC asibhekanga kakhulu imithetho ethize ngoba sinesiqiniseko sokuthi imithetho mihle ngempela eshaywayo futhi iyancomeka kakhulu kodwa inkinga yokuthi implementwe kuseyona nkinga leyo hayi kuphela kuma business mawuye emakhaya lapha uyathola ukuthi iseyiningi kakhulu ingqinamba ezikhona siNAFCOC sike sahambela cishe onke amakhosi ngezindlu zawo ukubheka izinkinga ezikhona kwezamabhizinisi kanjalo nokuthuthukiswa kweinqalasizinda emakhaya ukuze bakwazi ukwenza ibusiness. Sitholile ke ukuthi imithetho uma ingashaywa singajabula uma izogcizelela kakhulu noma ikhona skills development. Kodwa ukuthuthukiswa kosomabhizinisi ukuze bakwazi ukuqhudelana nosomabhizinisi asebeyimele nabo kufika kuseyinselelo enkulu lapha emakhaya nasemalokishini. Sibona manje amabhizinisi ngaleyo ndlela ayafa amabhizinisi ethu njengabantu abansundu. Siyayidinga ke nokho imithetho ezosivikela lapho kakhulu. Uwanda kwezitolo lezi ezinkulu sikujabulela kabi ukuthi isondele kithi ama-mall nakho konke. Kodwa ubani umnikazi wakho lokho? Miphi phela imithetho esivikelayo thina lapha ezindaweni ezisemakhaya nasemadolobheni ukuthi bethi ke laba ke njobathi siyibona nje ibali ukuthi baceba ngempela bayaqhubeka bayaceba thina siyaqhubeka nokuba mpofu. Manje ke thina siNAFCOC yes phatha kabi leyo nto ukuthi engathi kungakhona imithetho esivikela kakhulu leyo ngoba lento ivale izitolo zabantu ama-general deal ayaziwa uNAFCOC inhlangano endala kabi yingakho nganichazile ukunichazela ngoba iyaziwa ilwa izabalazi ukuthi abantu bangene bathi shiqe emnothweni ngempela hayi indaba yokudlala. Manje ke siyabona ukuthi hayi imithetho ebishayiwe ithi isivikele engathi manje ake reviewe ibheke ngempela ukuthi iyamcebisa yini umuntu omnyama lemithetho le iyenza yini thina ukuthi sikwazi ukubhekana ngqo nalezi inselele esibhekene nazo. Okunye esikubhekayo njengoNAFCOC ukufundisa abantu ngebusiness. Sibheka phansi einganeni ezikoleni balimi ziyafundiswa izingane ngokulima ngoba ngeke ukuthi nje sekimdala kingaka bese uthi ungayo ngifundisa ukulima njengoba siNAFCOC sibheke onke ama sectors. Enye sector le yokulima esithi ayifundiswe ezikoleni indaba yokulima ayingene curriculum yezikole ayikhulume ngokulima ingane ifundise encane ukulima ukuze ikuthande isindala ikwenze kahle. Kweze business sithi ezikoleni akube khona ama prefab nezakhiwo mningi umhlaba lapha ezikoleni kulandwe osomabhizinisi bafundise lapha nabantu abaqhamuke ezimbonini abanolwazi. Kungathatha uthisha efundele ukufundisa ingane engaza ubeka umcondo wakhe efemini bese kuthiwa uyena futhi ongabe uyafundise leyo nhlobo leyo esithi dual education system. Ingane from standard 8 9 10 akungafudulwa zonke ingane zisiwe ema-university. Akube khona ingane ezofundiswa la kubonakala le ngane ngeke iziye e-university. Akube khona uhlelo lapho oluzothi ingane ayifundiswe ukuze ikwazi ngebhizinisi iqasheke kalula. Yingakho ezimbonini uthola ukuthi asizethembi kahle lezi ingane eziphuma nama degrees nayo zingakaze zibeke umcondo efemini. So ke imithetho enjalo siyacela ukuthi ayibe khona kwezemfundo. Umuntu aphume seneziqu zakhe mase yele university later kulungile. Kodwa kungavele uphushwe le university yonke ngoba siyayibona inkinga nakhona eziqhamukayo ingane eziqashile. Okunye esikubona kakhulu indaba yemali. Thola imali. Inkinga ukunikeza umuntu omnyama imali emabhanke angizokwabala nangamagama. Kuseyinkinga enkulu kabi nje. Uthi mawubheka nje ngisho lebe sithi Land Bank awethu, othala bank abethu, hayi umlomo nje akukho osekwenzekile ukuthi lamabhange ayasiza. Sisezitha ezimbi kabi. Manje ke usukhohlwa nje ukuthi ngophela amabhange kahulumeni. Kusho ukuthi ngamanye amazwi imali yethu esibeke lapha. Uyamajini umuntu umnika imali uthi akugcineni imali yakho. Usuyakuyo usekushayela imithetho enkulu enzima ukuthi uyithola. Eyakho imali yakho yakho. Hayi yasiqaka lento. Ukuthi ke manje phola maseba ama commercial banks sikuphi isidingo sabo phela manje ngoba phela befuna bona basizwele thina kube lula nje ungene nje uthola imali mawuqhamuka kwajabule futhi manje uthi becabela bebheke ngamehlo anzima kabi ukuthi inkinga okugcina indaba zezimakethe bakithi thina sine office lapha neCloud market sekuneminyaka sewunafu nafcock hey inkinga uku-accessa imarket eSouth Africa nokudla kwakho usukulimela usuka kwaNongoma usuka koKandla usuka kuzo zonke indawo uzokuletha la imarket akuthathwa makuthathiwe unikwe iziprice eyenza ukuthi ungaphindi nje ucabange ukuthi uye emarket ungaphindi ngisho sekuthuncenga kanjani baye lezi zinto zinkinga kakhulu uRaset lolu hlelo likahulumeni iRaset radical agrarian socio-economic transformation sithi alungene ngodlidla kala sijazi lepoison link inophezulu 6 ngoba sesizwezilo galajani bagijima baya la kulezi inkundla betshela uhulumeni ukuthi hayi indaba kaRaset imakethe le kahulumeni asikho isidingo sayo kodwa ba ama agent kuyo yonke indawo uma wena uzosupply spinach kwa Department of Health ufuna uqale uyokhuleka endodeni ethina okuthiwa iagent ikudikadike ithatha into yakho ibeke phansi ngeprice isuke lapho yona uyoyidayisa ngenkulu iprice lapha sithi ke imithetho bakithi akisibhekele kule redistribution sithi laba abantu abakhulele emaplazini bazalelwe emaplazini akungathiwa yisebenzi bese kuthiwa mase kushaya imithetho ukuthi akubuyisa umhlaba bese kuthi ucabangela laba kade besebenzela amabhunu lapha sithi thina umuntu nje oseplazini akanikezwe umhlaba awuthole umhlaba nathi siyabazi ukuthi kumhlungabe uthola iplaza ususikela umuntu kodwa sithi abasikelwe futhi abanikezwe amalungelo agcwele obunikazi bomhlaba baxhaseke bathole full title deed mabe emarket nasemabhangi bathola imali zabo kuningi bengakusho isikhathi sincane ngiyabonga thank you.
Thank you very much, Nangamanats. Thank you very much. May we invite a representative from COSATU? COSATU is not here. South African Democratic Teachers Union, SATU, is also not here. May we invite Mr. Themba Mzimela from University of KZN? That finishes our list. Oh, someone is coming. Is it SATU or COSATU? Or both?
Ngibonga umphathi wohlelo ngibingelele idatangiswa ezikahulumeni ngibingelele bonke amalungu omphakathi azi kulenkundla njengoba seshilo nje uMzimela cha bamhijackile nje uMzimela kodwa ngenhlanhla enkulu uMzimela lezi zinto abakhuluma ngazo usijwayele ngokomsebenzi wakhe ngizo thinda nje kakhulukazi Kuqala lokho kumayelana ne-land reform la eSouth Africa sibheke lezinselelo esibhekene nazo. Bese ngibuya ngibheke mhlambeni nokulwa nepoverty ey'ndaweni zasemakhaya, nginikeze mhlambeni isibonelo noma experience yami ikakhulukazi ey'ndaweni zasemakhaya lapho umphakathi onawo wonke ama-resources kodwa ongakwazi ukuthi ufinyelele ey'makethe. Ngisho uhulumeni bandla lakwethu uvumile ukuthi le approach ye-willing buyer ne-willing seller ayisebenzi. Now, kusho ukuthi le model abayisebenzisakho ayikwazi ukusiza umuntu ngempela ongenawo umhlaba futhi ongenayo imali. Ngisho na uhulumeni imbala ushila akanayo imali yokuthenga umhlaba. Bese kuthi kusenjalo ke kuleyo mzamane emncane ukuthi bathenga umhlaba ebantwini babuyisele ebantwini. Hayi bandla kune corruption edumazakho. Uthola ukuthi ngisho zona izithunywa zikahulumeni zize zibange khona ngisho lo mhlaba nomncane ebekuthiwa uhlelo labo bantu ufuna bawuthola. Abanye bengabesatshelwa noma befakile ngisho izicelo zabo ukuthi ke manje ke lolu daba lobo longena nini kwakhona ezinkantolo. Okunye kugcinisa khona abantu abaronga amabomu ukuze labo babehambile baphelelwe isikhathi kuthiwa icala lakhe lingenanga kahle senilile. Then bese kuzoba ke udaba lolu lokusiza abantu basemakhaya. Kukhona abaninhlelo eziningi ze-rural development bezama uku-addressa ubuphofu endaweni zasemakhaya. Mina ngokuzalwa ngalapha empangeni kodwa ngokusebenza cishe sengihambe yonke iKwaZulu-Natal. Okunye kwakhona ngibheka khona ubuphofu. Kukhona isifunda la KwaZulu-Natal okuthiwa kwamhlaba eyalingana noma ke ngolimo olujwayelekile lokahulumeni umkhanya kule district municipality. Lo mhlaba ke kucebe ngeimbuzi nezinkomo. Kodwa abakwazi ngisho ukudayisa inkomo ziphume ngale zize ngapha ngaphandle komkhanya ukuthi district. Kuye kuthiwe ke zinamatela. Bese kuthiwa lezi ezajova noma zaswala ngo-1911 zazeza ngapha nganeno noma sezagonywa kuthiwa cha bobo azikwazi ukudlula zinamatela. Umkhona umuntu ke engimazikho owahamba wathenga inkomo beku-April ezolobola khona lapho lasempangeni wafika wathenga inkomo kwathi hayi suyikhokhele ke ndoda ke kusawuhlolwa igazi ePitoli kuzothatha 3 weeks usuku wayenqume ngalo wayezosangaza inkomo ekhweni lakhe azange lwashaya lwadlo zingabufiki lezo nkomo wabe sephoqela ukuthi hambise imali seyonegotiate nabazali bakhe. Bese khona ke lapha kwamhlaba iyalingana kunemizamo eminingi abantu abayenza khona. Uhulumeni uyeyenza abantu ithembisa athi hayi uzobakhela ngisho ilokhuzana ilokhu ikambo lezi zokudayisa inkomo hayi bandla kushikisha ufuthu. Base befikile abantu kuthola ukuthi imfuyo yabo izife ngisibola ibolele khona le kodwa imizamo yokuthi njena ihambe balekelele badayise lutho. Bese kuba khona okunye bayakuzama lokuthiwa ama cooperatives. Ngine case yabantu baso elokhuzana ophongolo endaweni okuthiwa ayisilotshana ukuthiwa yiselokhuzaneni sinikhohlele kodwa ngaphandle kwase-Piet Retief. Laba bantu kwathiwa batshala upelepele bayekiswe embilini batshala upelepele. Base bewutshalile upelepele usuvuthiwe abanayo indawo yokudayisa kusho market yakhona. Lo wayefike ezobakhuthaza ukuthi bawutshale wakhala amaphepha. Mangifika laphana hawu pelepele ugcwala inqolobane yabantu yindaba na asazi ukuthi sizodayisa kanjani lo pelepele. Hlanhle enkulu ngathintana umuntu wakhe ekhasa ngaleso sikhathi wabalekelela wathi uzobasiza kulona usuvunwe kuphela ngale kwalokho there was no plan ukuthi laba nje sebewutshalile lo pelepele njena uzothola uzodayisa kuphinda lo pelepele ufuna ukusuka lena kophongolo uze lapha esiphingo kwaRopensin lapha bewugaya khona. Bese ngibuya ke ngize bandla kule mthetho yonke lade bekhuluma ngayo ozakwethu mihle kakhulu kodwa bandla inkinga iku-implementation. When it comes to implementation hayi kushikisha ufuthu bandala kwethu igcina iculwa nje and imusubuza igcina ingasongisho nabantu bakhona. Okundabukisa kakhulu ke lokhu kwe-land reform kwaba khona i-dialogue Western Cape ngibuka ku-TV kukhona u-deputy minister angimusho ukuthi yena yena oyemele ugovernment lapha. He could not actually debate nalabafana laba bakwa BLF ngoba he did not have accurate information ngokuthi ugovernment usenzeni yena. But lo muntu wangiphatha kakhulu waye-deputy minister yokuthi yena uzomela ugovernment. Ngathi bandla lakwethu kuseyihlazo ke makunjena kuwukuthi umuntu ukuthi u-deputy minister cannot actually engage other stakeholders to explain the position ye-government with regard to land reform. Bese ngigcina ngithi bandla i-land reform bandla lakwethu ekhulunywa ngapha i-pace yakhona sikhathaze wonke umuntu isilonge ngendlela eyisimangaliso. Ngoba nawo ugovernment ngiyacabanga ke mase ngifunda ke nakwezinye indawo hayi bathi gcina ixake yena imithetho ngoba igcina isisayine ezinkantolo ngoba kuyacaca usho ukuthi naye nenyawo zakhe ziboshiwe. Bese ngiphola ngalolu dadewethu uYuvon othena yini lena ehlukanisakho egcina singakwazi ukuhlangana singabantu bala eSouth Africa. Hey kukhona udaba olukhulu lwemedia. Imedia imele lokhu ukuthi sihlukanise thina abantu esikhona lapha. Imeke iyathola nje ukuthi bahlangene abantu. Yona ifuna ukuthola lento ezobahlukanisa, ezobahlukanisa. Bese iphakamisa yona ke ukuze kubhale kuma headline ngisho amaphepheni yonke into. Na like ezethe kanenge basebenza lo msebenzi ke bageda ukuthi obani abahlangene bese befuna lozo ubahlukanisa ngamabomu bese yakhuluma ke naye omnyazi akhuluma engazi akhohle ukuthi sonke simbhekile suka khona la KZN. Sinama facts ke bandla izinto ezenzeka khona lapha. Angibonge bangijumile ndodana bengalindele ukuthi ngicedela abantu.
Thank you very much, Babu Mzimela. I want to check if the representative from KZN Business Council of Chambers is in the room. Still not. Dominic Collette, you are welcome, sir. Your 5 minutes start now.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting the Kwazulu-Natal Business Chamber Council to present an oral submission to this high-level panel. My name is Dominic Collette. I'm chairman of the Kwazulu-Natal Business Chambers Council. Our submission focuses on the Working Group 2 Act's Land Reform, Restitution, Redistribution and Security of Tenure, and in particular the National Water Act 36 of 1998. Although this does not fall in the Working Group 1, the Act does tie it together with poverty eradication and inequality. I would like to acknowledge for their contribution to this submission Mr. Pat McGrady, Manufacturing Director, Sappi Paper and Paper Packaging, South Africa, Mr. Kobus Ulofse, CEO of Ilembe Chamber of Commerce, Kushela Naidu, Technical Director of 004, Mr. Philip De Silva, Senior Vice President, Operations, African and Indian Ocean, IFA Hotels and Resorts, and the work carried out by Ilembe District Municipality and the Board of KwaZulu-Natal Business Chamber. This submission is made with the view of business that accelerated infrastructure development has a direct impact in meeting the requirements of land restitution and poverty eradication. The implementation of the water use license application, governed by the National Water Act 36 of 1998, is crippling infrastructure development and overall economic development in KZN. The extensive hill slope seepage wetlands found in KZN presents a unique wetland characteristic, and the current process and requirements for Section 21 CN1 water use licenses is severely constraining investment and economic development in KZN, crippling the municipality's mandate to provide infrastructure and basic services to their communities, as well as private investors in providing foreign direct investment and job opportunities. The extensive WULA requirements require for every project in KZN, causing tremendous delays in project implementation. The process has a lengthy 300 days time frame on receiving approval, irrespective of the type of authorization. The Department of Water and Sanitation is also short-staffed to deal with these applications at a provincial level. All water use licenses must get specialist input. The comments and engineering comments from Department of Water and Sanitation National Head Office is causing further bottlenecks and delays. In some cases, projects do not trigger any environmental sensitivity in terms of NEMA and therefore require no environmental authorization, but woolers are required due to proposed infrastructure being situated within 500 meters of a watercourse. Although the NEMA requirements and EIA process have recently improved with amendments, the woolers have now created a similar legislative sluggishness we saw with the EIA process a few years back. It is the view of business that processes duplicated in the NEMA and WULA processes must be amended. One example is the timing of the public participation requirements, which is 30 days in an EIA and 60 days in a WULA process. This immediately sets the two processes apart with limited ability to share public meetings or document submissions. The doubling up on process is costly and above all can push timeframes for development out by years. Water use in South Africa is managed through a water use registration process, which requires that every water use be registered by the regional office of DWS or an established catchment management agency. A water use defined in Section 21 must be licensed unless it is listed in Schedule 1 or is an existing lawful use or is permissible under general authorization, or if a responsible authority waives the need for a license. The NWA defines a watercourse as a river or spring, a natural channel in which water flows regularly or intermittently, a wetland, lake or dam into which or from which water flows, and a collection of water which the minister may, by notice of a gazette, declare to be a watercourse. Duplicated processes. Obtaining a water use license is an enormous, expensive and time-consuming exercise. A general list comprising of specialist studies must be submitted with a technical report and application. These include master layout plans, the wetland delineation, 1 in 100-year floodline, design report for water routing structures, a copy of the basic assessment or EIA, a copy of the authorization issued by NEMA, approved EMPs, stormwater management plan, geohydrological investigation, work method statement, wetland rehabilitation report, monitoring program, conservation management plan, landscaping plan. All these reports are duplicated in an EIA or basic assessment review in terms of NEMA. The regional specific issues are the timeframes for water use is 300 days from inception of application, irrespective of the nature or complexity of the application, with generally the issuing of a water use license takes approximately 1 year. KZN DWS Regional Office is the entry point of all water use authorizations, but only National Office may issue the water use license that has to be signed off by the DG, which can take 3 months just to obtain a signature. The technical assessment of the water use authorization application is undertaken by numerous reviewers and other relevant government departments for their input and recommendations. Currently, legislation prescribes that a water use license be obtained for any activity or development proposed within 500-meter radius upstream or downstream from the boundary of a wetland, or any water resource or within 100-year floodline or riparian area, whichever is the greatest. Although the new general authorization regulations that were gazetted in 26th of September 2016 replaces the need for a water user to apply for a license provided that the water use is within the limits and conditions of the general authorization. The decision of a GA will only follow once the extensive submission have been made. It is evident that, contrary to the drive for enabling conditions for public and private development, the water use licensing process in its design, extensive requirements with a one-shoe-fits-all approach, and execution, lack of considering regional KZN wetland characteristics is delaying water licenses, thereby slowing down development programs. So I'll bounce straight onto the recommendations. So the following broad business recommendations is that the Wooler process be reviewed and the following be considered in those deliberations. The restriction of the 500-metre radius upstream and downstream from the boundary of a wetland or within a 100-year floodline or greatest wavered, and a 32-metre buffer from the centre line of a watercourse be used as per the NEMA requirements. The duplication of the water use licence be mitigated by moving the Wooler requirement to the EIA or basic assessment process with a view to restructure resources within the two departments. Review the NEMA and Wooler process to synchronise the duplicated timeframes. A professional body be constituted similar to the engineers, where professionals are regulated in terms of their expertise and experience and take responsibility for reporting and implementation. The department would merely have an oversight role. We obviously make ourselves available for any further discussions, and thank you for the time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Collett. May we now invite a representative from COSATU to come and make an input. Your 5 minutes start now, sir.
Thank you very much, Program Director. Greetings to everyone, and a special greeting to our former President, Mr. Kgalema Motlanthe. I must say, Program Director, that as COSATU, we have been asked by one of our affiliates, which is SACTU, also to utilize their time. So I'm sure you are going to give us 10 minutes. I'm sorry to be arriving at this time. I must say that the apology on my behalf was forwarded by our provincial chairperson, Comrade Buti Zibula, to the panel, because we had a prior arrangement, we had a prior commitment in the province. The Congress of South African Trade Unions, COSATU, welcomes and supports the appointment of the high-level panel on the assessment of key legislation. South Africa has achieved a great deal in terms of passing many progressive laws and policies in our 22 years of democracy. However, all too often, these progressive laws and policies are not implemented with the full energy and resources that they require by both government and society at large. Sadly, government departments frequently do not appear to be concerned by this massive challenge. In fact, we are saying, Chairperson, that in the country, in fact, we've got a lot of progressive laws, but the main issue is the issue of implementation, which we've been always talking about, but the major problem is that we don't really seem to be putting enough effort to address this issue of implementation. COSATU hopes that the high-level panel will be a critical step forward towards correcting this. The current higher education crisis confirms how important the panel task is. Because when you say you need free education, you don't implement it, and you don't make assessment of how are you progressing in terms of implementing your laws, that results to the current crisis that you are facing. COSATU appreciates and welcomes the chance to share its views with the panel on this important matter. COSATU will share its initial assessments today and submit a comprehensive submission during the panel's
scheduled December hearings in Cape Town. We hope that our submission will add value to the panel's work. We are going to be submitting a comprehensive submission in Cape Town as COSATU, but we are just submitting, this is our initial submission. In fact, it's a taste of what we are going to be submitting in Cape Town. Triple challenges. COSATU shares the panel's thesis that South Africa's challenges are underpinned by our perennial 36% long-term unemployment rate. In terms of the what you call definition of unemployment, we are sitting around between 35 and 36%, of which we think as a country it's a matter that needs our urgent attention. Our infamy of being the most unequal society in the world and unsustainable mass levels of poverty. It is important to remember that our democratic state did not create this crisis. Rather, it is the painful legacy of more than 350 years of colonialism, apartheid, and capitalism. COSATU appreciates the massive amount of good work that our ANC-led government has managed to achieve in our 22 years of being in democracy. These achievements include free health care for pregnant women and young children, millions of social grant recipients, free access to basic education for the poor, billions spent on tertiary education for the poor, doubling the number of tertiary students, providing housing for more than 3 million families, providing basic services for 90% of the country, etc. Whilst strongly appreciating and applauding these excellent achievements, much remains to be done. We will never progress as a nation until South Africans enjoy full, decent, permanent employment. Our school systems are poor, teachers are overstretched, and often work in violent conditions. You know, violent in schools. Teachers are, tertiary education is simply unaffordable for working and middle-class families. Millions cannot afford decent housing, electricity becoming increasingly unaffordable. Our workforce remains badly unskilled. Our cities are better known for under-expenditure than for skilling workers. We remain with the world's highest levels of HIV/AIDS, TB, and alcohol abuse rates. Our crime levels remain horrendous, in particular violent crimes. Most of our laws and policies are correct. However, all too often, they are simply not implemented or are woefully under-resourced. However, COSATU is adamant that government has taken too long to develop a comprehensive social security net. You know, in South Africa, if you are a child, you are able to receive what you call a child grant. And if you are an elder, you are able to receive a pension. But what do you do about the missing link of those people who are looking for employment but they cannot find an employment? People who are not working. As COSATU sithi, labantu abangasebenzi, abafunayo umsebenzi. It can't be their fault ukuthi abasebenzi, but they are looking for employment. Hence, we are calling for a comprehensive social security plan to cater for abantu abangasebenzi, abafunayo kodwa umsebenzi, abangakwazi ukuthi bawuthole. Our public health care infrastructure and badly overstretched, COSATU strongly supports government's planned national health insurance. Our plea is for it to be fast-tracked. We are talking about NHI. Tertiary education must be made free for working and middle-class families. Such access should then be funded through a ring-fenced addition to income and company taxes as well as through the introduction of a graduate tax. Such additional taxes should be progressive and linked to the income of the person and company in question. Our spatial planning continued and entrenched our apartheid geography. Workers and the poor continue to be allocated housing in townships far from their places of work. Uma kuthiwa kwakhiwe i-RDP house, i-RDP house fanele ize yakhiwe le ey'lalini. Ayikwazi ukwakhiwa where abantu are able to access our workplace easily. And we are saying that that is an apartheid mentality esiqhubeka nayo of spatial development of our community. And we are saying that as COSATU, that thing really, it must revisited and it must end. COSATU strongly rejects and the repeated attempts to blame unemployment on unions. Our progressive labor laws, these laws are frequently cited by organized business as an excuse not to hire because they claim the laws prevent companies from being able to fire workers. The reality is that is false. More than 1 million workers were fired in 2008 economic crisis. 52,000 mine workers have been retrenched this year. Instead, workers have borne the brunt of the increased casualization of the workplace, with workers being dumped at labor brokers with perennial short-term work contracts which lack job security rights, benefits, decent wages, and conditions. COSATU continue to be vehemently opposed to labor brokers. As much as we understand the role of government in growing economy, but we are failing to understand why the government want to think for the careless employers who do not respect the law. We said ban labor brokers, but the government regulates through Section 198. But the very same employers do not respect Section 198. Our institutions such as Department of Labor, CCMA, are not assisting. They complain about capacity. This Section 198, really, we must say, it's not helping us as workers. And we think that regulating labor brokers through Section 198, it has proven that it's not working. So we are saying as COSATU, ban these labor brokers. Youth incentives degrades wages and discriminates the elder workers who have been at the workplace for quite some time. It only benefits the employer, the company bosses. LRA, it seeks to regulate workplace relations through, although in terms of status, we remain unequal. You have an LRA in South Africa. This LRA regulates the workplace. But we must say that as workers, we still feel that we are unequal in terms of treatment between ourselves and the employer. Let me make just a scenario. Let me make an example. As a worker, you go to the arbitration, you go to CCMA to challenge your matter. When you come back from CCMA, you have won your matter. Once the employer decides that it reviews your matter, you remain at home. You should be going to work, but you remain at home because the employer decided that it reviews the matter. Even if the labor court has decided in your favor as a worker, but the employer will still decide that we review your matter to the next court of appeal, you remain at home. So that is an unfair treatment of workers at the workplace, even though that the Labor Relations Act is there. And we are saying that we feel that as COSATU we are still treated unequal. The last one. The last one is the issue of the retrenchments. We think you need to attend to the issue of the retrenchments in terms of the law, how it should be regulated. I can no longer go deep on that one, but we have said that retrenchment should be a last resort. But workers are retrenched daily, and employers continue to use retrenchments as a primary priority. We also we are going to make a submission that we want you to also increase the capacity of Department of Labor, the capacity of CCMA in order to deal with the issues of non-compliant and defend workers. On issue of land, our submission go into a detail that what is it that we think that we need to do in terms of defending farm workers. We think as government, together as progressive forces, we have not done enough in terms of defending farm workers. They're still exposed to vulnerability. That's what is in our submission as well. The other issue around the issue of the nation building, in closing, Chairperson, we are saying we must not be bafana. We cannot afford to rest on past victories and seek to convince the youth of how great we once were. We have to continuously improve all our people's life. Thank you very much.
Well, Bafana, I don't know, but Kaizer Chiefs is getting there. Kaizer Chiefs is back to its winning ways. Thank you very much. You would have noticed that we were kind enough, we gave the time allocated to SADU, to COSATU, as an affiliate. Others must not take that chance, because I have a record here of all organizations that confirmed to be presenting. Thank you very much. The photographers are also doing a great job, I must say. I received a message on Facebook that says, Program Director, I received a message from one educationist, Sisfundiswa Jim. She says, Program Director, please tell those who are sleeping to wake up and enjoy the discussion. So the photographers are doing a great job. Don't be the one who's caught napping in the midst of action. Thank you very much to the photographers. Now we move to a list of stakeholders that had pledged their commitment to present in as far as Working Group 2 is concerned. You will notice that those who have already presented have presented on Working Group 1 by and large, but they also touch on Working Group 2 and 3. Well, we can't be that myopic to say, no, only Group 2. So we will allow that space for presenters to engage across. Now I want to invite Pastor Sibia. Is Pastor Sibia here to start the discussions on the land discussion? Pastor Sibia is not here. Nonhlanhla Mzobe? You can't be Nonhlanhla, Baba. Pastor Sibia, our pastor. You are welcome. Thank you very much, Pastor. 5 minutes. 5 minutes.
Pathohlela ni parliament lonke ake ngibingelele zonke izakhamuzi. Inkinga yami ayinkulu, ayinde futhi. Ngakhele phansi kwindawo zamakhosi. Isicelo sami amandla amakhosi ukuthi la sakhele khona phansi kwamakhosi. Amandla amakhosi sibona esethathwa ingonyama trust. Isifika khona lapha yana endaweni esakhe kuzona isiskipha manje na emhlabeni wethu. Ilelo nje ukuthi iparlamente elisibhekele thina esakhele eindaweni zamakhosi ukuthi ingonyama ingabi namandla okusinyakazisa okusikhipha ey'ndaweni zamakhosi, ukuthatha iy'ndawo zethu ey'ndaweni zamakhosi. Nanti nje ukuthi amandla amakhosi akanikezwe njalo amandla okusebenza emphakathini angathathwa ingonyama. Ngiyabonga.
Thank you very much, Pastor. Nonhlanhla Mzobe? Not here. Reverend Mavuso? Not here. Let's clap for Reverend Mavuso. Take your time, the stage is yours, Reverend. Thank you very much. 5 minutes.
Siyabonga kakhulu ithuba mphathi wohlelo. Igama lami nguMbhekiseni Mavuso ngisuka le eMelmote eMakhasaneni. Omama bethu ke babe ngamaciko uma beqambe indawo. Uma imhlaba abahlala kona bengasawuqondi babe bethi sihlala kwamama ngalahlwa. Kwamntana mwendele kuphi na? Lelizwe sihlala kulona iSouth Africa selaba nemithetho eminingi, selaba mthetho thetho. Alisaqondakali. Uyabona nje manje njoba ngihlala emakhaya nje awusakwazi ngisho uma usedolobheni awukwazi ngisho ukuyikhulula ngoba ufuneka ukhokhe imali. Yonke into isiyaba imali lapha emhlabeni. Isinkwa sidula ngendlela emangalisayo kodwa sakhiwa lapha sakhiwa khona la ekhaya zonke izinto zakhiwa lapho kodwa siyabiza isinkwa sibheke ku20 R. Amanzi siyawathenga, amanzi asiyathengwa seyimali. Mungenayo imali ngeke usawaphuza amanzi kuleli izwe sihlala kulona. Kodwa okukhulu kakhulu sesaba ama victims of development. Victims of democracy. Uma kuza intuthuko kufuneka wena umuntu ubaleke usuke, uyidedele intuthuko. Ususwe makuza umgwaqo kuzokwakhiwa umgwaqo omhle ngakini kufuneka kusuka imizi makuzokwakhiwa izitolo amamoli ngakini kufuneka kusuka imizi yabantu abamnyama nabantu abacindezela uma kuza ibhizinisi elikhulu njengoba sekwabakhona imayini ezingena ngazange kukhulunywe nabantu kufuneka abantu bathuthwe kulezo ndawo bahambe ngakho nje thina sesingabantu abasuswayo nje sisazi ukuthi thina siyogcina sihlezi kuphi. Sinjalo nje ayikho into okuthiwa sinayo amanzi mawuthi ufuna amanzi kuthiwa amanzi akahulumeni awunamanzi mawuthi complaina ngezihlahla ezibulawayo nezihlahla ezinhle kuthiwa izihlahla zomnyango wezemvelo ayikho nje into esisenayo lokho kumbiwayo phansi lapho kungama mineral kuthiwa kukhona okwethu okukahulumeni thina asinalutho nje singabantu abangenalutho siphila impilo ebuhlungu umhlaba esihlala kuwona kuthiwa sisenawo asinawo umhlaba ungowengonyama trust khona kade esho la ngaphambi kwami asiyazi nokuthi ihlala laphi ingonyama trust leyo sasithi ubani uma wakhile endaweni kuthiwa unawo umhlaba owenkosi inkosi siyaba inkosi ngomhlaba mumva nje wena muntu awunamhlaba uma kukhona isinqumo esithathwayo ngendawo akukhulunywa nawe wena kukhulunywa nenkosi makukhulunywa nenkosi kobe sekuphelele njalo owethu umhlaba uphi siyogcina sihlezi kuphi njengoba sisuswa njalo nje Mbuze sizowubuza lapha engifuna ukubuza. Nina ke nithi nibhekela uhlelo leli lokubuyiswa kwemhlaba iland reform. Nginombuzo engibuzayo ukuthi thina njengoba ngiyazi mina nginesiqiniseko sokuthi akaze sisho thina ukuthi sifuna amaplaza. Sathi thina sifuna umhlaba okwakungowokhokho bethu abasuswa kuwona akaze sisho ukuthi sifuna amaplaza. Uma uswawushintsha lo mhlaba wenza iplaza inkinga yakho le. Akuyona yini. Yingani ke umuntu uma efuna into yakhe bese buzwa ukuthi uzoyenzani ulahlekelwa imoto ngoba umhlaba ngulinganisa ngemoto ulahlekelwa imoto yakho i private car Iyatholakala umuye emaphoyiseni bese uzwe iphoyisa lithi hayi imoto yakho siyitholile siyaguqulwa yenziwe ivan. Uma ufika khona lithi iphoyisa hayi ngeke ngikusize ngalutho uxoxana nangu lo muntu okuyena owayentshotshile wayenza ivan. Afika athi lo muntu ngoba sengayenza ivan uzokhokha indleko zami. Athi ngoba le moto sengayithola umsebenzi ithutha abantu lapha kulo line nawe futhi ufune kuyisebenzisa kanjalo ungeze kuyisebenzisa kanjalo imoto ayibuyeli kuwena. Ngangiyithole ino petrol omncane ngafaka upetrol mhla ngiyintshontsha buyisa upetrol wami. Ngiyabuza nje namanje ukuthi yizwe linjani leli lakithi othi mawuthi ufuna umhlaba wakho noma umhlaba wakini kodwa yonke imibuzo ebhalwe lapho ufune kuyiphendule ngesingisi. Linjalo leli phepha elichaza lo mhlaba lincane ngeke ukwazi ukuchaza zonke izinto kulona. Kuthiwa nje shona ukuthi uphoshini bani ubize ngegama umlungu seliqambe leyo ndawo yakini. Siphila impilo ebuhlungu bafowethu lapha eSouth Africa singabantu abasuswayo intuthuko sisuswa zimayini singazuzi lutho sisuswa njalo akukhulunywa nathi akho lutho exoxwa nathi ayikho into okuthiwa sinayo ngakho sesaba ngabantu nje abangenalutho nababukelwa phansi siphile ezweni elibuhlungu asazi siyogcina senze njani ngakho ke siyanxusa siyakhuleka nakunina ukuthi niselekelele thina abantu esihlala emakhaya ngoba nalaba belungeni bahlonipha kakhulu bamaplaza hayi ukuthi bakhiqiza ukudla okusiza thina bakhiqizela ukuthi bakuthutha ukudla kunokuthuthwa kokudla kusiwa kwamanye amazwe okudala ukuthi uma thina sizokuthola sithole lokho kusalayo 23% la ngaphakathi nakhona bese sikuthenga ngama price amakhulu iprice ebizayo akuphele ukuthuthwa kokudla akuphele ukuthuthiswa kwabantu akuphele ukususwa kwabantu emaplazini nokuxoshwa kwabantu nokuhlukunyezwa kwabantu beshawa. Ngisengcina ke ngifuna ukukhuluma ngeindaba ezibuhlungu. Manje nihlangene kanje ngikhumbuza ugogo Masikane wale Red Flag ngase Great Town owabulawa umlungu ehleze eplazini umlungu wamaphezulu kwakhe ngesithuthuthu waze wafa. Uma esefika enkantolo udokotela owamhlolayo wathi lo gogo ubulawe ukuthi besemkhulu kakhulu ekhuluphele kakhulu. Ngiyakhumbula ukuthi lapha emasangweni enkwaleni umlungu wadubula ingane zesikole ezimbili zidla umoba uThemnkosi Mpanza noVukani Shange wababulala abekho namhlanje icala masilise enkantolo kwakuthiwa umlungu akaboshwa. Ugogo Irene Masikane lengikhuluma ngaye eGreat Town umlungu wambulala amaqedwe wabulala indodana yakhe uBongkosi uma kufika enkantolo kwathiwa umlungu akaboshwa. Umlungu akaboshwa kulelizwe futhi uma ufile udutshulo umlungu noma ubule umlungu ethi udubula imfene noma udubula inja noma udubula ubethi udubula inyamazana ubethi udubula ikawo uma ufika lapho usufile kuthiwa ubulawe ingculaza noma ubuphuza kakhulu isibindi sakho bese sonakele.
Siyabonga kakhulu Reverend Mavuso. Siyabonga kakhulu. Those are the issues that we take very seriously because those are lived experiences. They are not a fairy tale, which is the core of what we are here to do. Ngicela ukubheka ukuthi uThokozane ndawo khona Edward Mpeko no Mr. Zkhali. If bakhona ngicela basondele balandelana in that order. Thokozani ndawo khona? Nalabe sengibabizile ngizocela babe ready nje. No, you can sit down. One after another.
Angicele ukubonga kumphathi wohlelo ngibingelele bonke abangaphakathi kakhulu abaqhamuka phezulu kwaNdlunkulu abepanel kakhulu ngokukhethekile ubaba oke waba usekela mongameli ubaba uMonhlante nabanye odadewethu uAnika nabanye ngibabonayo nengingabazi namakhosi akhona ngaphakathi nobuholi bonke obukhona ngaphakathi nabantwana basendlunkulu abakhona ngaphakathi nguthokozana wakwandawo ebabanango kwanobamba nami sebebekile ngaphambili kakhulu lapha usihlalo ubaba uMohlante uzokuthi chatha umhlaba wasebabanango omkhulu umphakathi wasebabanango uhlukumezekile uqilazekile umhlaba wasebabanango ngowamawadi amawadi awu12 awunaye umasipala ama demarcation board athathe aqame umhlaba awisela kwamanye omasipala sala ibabanango injalo yona inothile ibabanango ikhiqizela isizwe ngizothanda ukubeka ke ngibekele nengihamba nabo kusendlalelo semithetho ke nje kuba kubekeka imithetho kakhulukazi elawula imhlaba kunemithetho ke eyavela kakhulukazi engizowuthinta lona okabeke ngawo abangaphambili o-ITB Act ephase kusele izinsuku ezimbili iphasiswa kuzovotwa ngo-1994 ngokukhumbula kwesizwe kuyakhumbuleka ukuthi kwakwesishishili umntwana kwaphinda angene ekhalaza ngamandla ongangezwe lakhe okwathi soku last minute ke kwasekuthiwa uyaphasa lo mthetho wasekuyiwa okhethweni lo mthetho ke asiwutholanga ukuthi kahle kahle thina sizwe kuze kube manje nje amakhosi abengazi ngawo ukuthi kahle kahle usebenza kanjani kuze kube namhlanje laphana ke babanango kube kuyindawo white area yabamhlophe esikhulile emaplazini sasebenza amaplazi eminyakeni ewu12 ngangiseplazini kubuswa kwangekho zimpi kwangekho mbango ngisho ubuholi bendabuko babukhona kodwa umbango yayingekho kuqalile nje khona lapho kusukela nje kuzovotwa kuma 90s kuqala kwenkathazeko sabona abamhlophe behamba benyenya behamba ngokukhulu kushesha asazi ukuthi bayapha abamhlophe bengabiki ukuthi bayapha abamhlophe beshiya amaplazi na ekubeni kwase kuqalile kwabana amahlathi ayengena kamondi saphi singatshenwanga siwumphakathi umphakathi unqunyelwe 14 days ukuthi awuthuthe ungazi ukuthi kuzothutha uyephi ungathuthu layishwe masoja kuyolahlwa manje ke kwabanzima kakhulu ezimpilweni zabantu basebabana ngokuqala kwalesi simo later ama 1980s uma 1990s base beshiya abamhlophe asazi ukuthi kwenze njani bayaphi kwavela ke kancane ke lapho besikhona thina emaplazini ngaphansi emaplazini amafa kwavela ukuthi kukhona imali etholakala phesheya ezizokwenza ukundlela ukuthi kube khona inyamazane lapha kodwa singabizwanga singatshenwanga ngisho inkosi ingazange sazise ukuthi kuzoba nesiqiwi lapha yana kule amaplazi angasemakhosini sabona nje ukuqhubeka kufaka ufence omkhulu kususwa kuzocingo olwalihlukanisa amadlela sase sithola sekufakwa inyamazane njalo kwabizwa umhlangano kwathiwa nazi inyamazane kuza inyamazane ningayihluphi ningabulala ucingo mabethu bayabulukuza baphendula abantu bafuna ukwazi ukuthi yini kulo mhlangano wawubizwe elokuza ubuholo babuhola kulesi sifundazwe ngaleso sikhathi kakhulukazi ababe ngaphansi kweqembu le-IFP kwathiwa hey ungakhulumi lokho intuthuko le hlala phansi manje ke saba nenkinga ke nje kusukela lapho ukuthi manje basingatshenwa thina ke esingaphakathi ke thina ke ngoba umhlangano ongaphandle ungekhona emaplazini thina singaphakathi ke basingatshena ukuthi le ntuthukoni sizozuzani thina ngale ntuthuko thina umphakathi olapha ngaphakathi makufakwa lezi nyamazana yini esizoyizuza thina ngoba sekuyisikhathi sentando yeningi sofuna sizuze kwatholakala ukuthi lokho akukho umuntu osinakayo umnumzane uMashali wabe ukuthi yena unikiwe amandla iphathi imandla zonke zesifundazwe nabakhulu bayawuthanda lo msebenzi kwaqala inkathazeko sahlukumezeka ke thina ke sokungeneleza inyamazane nezinezifo kwafima imfuyo ngisho ukuthi ke lapha ke lokuza le act ke masithe masithola siyilandelela ke sizwa ama NGO sayithola ukuthi iyavikela le act ingonyama trust board ikhona lapha eyavikela khona amalungelo abantu masisithola ngoba sasingazi ngayo kwasicabanga ukuthi kwenziwa yini ithi ivikela amalungelo abantu kukhona lapha isigaba lapha 2.8 sichaza ukuthi kufuza ukuthi konke okwenziwayo kodwa kuhlonishwa amalungelo abantu lapho noma kuyadevelopha noma kwenziwani kodwa kuyofanele ukuthi amalungelo abantu omhlaba kuyomele ahlonishwe. Manje wasathola kodwa konke lokhu bekwenziwa kuze kube namhlanje. Okunye ke ngizodlulela kukho ke lapha yana ke ingasebukhosini ubukhosi bakwaNobamba buhlukile. Ubuholi bendabuko bakwaNobamba fane nobakwezinye ifunda zamakhosi. Bunomlando wabantwana basendlunkulu, bunomlando wokubambisana kwabaholi ababheke lo yamuzi wakwaNobamba osebaba na. Muva njengoba sekunamathenda nakho konke ama-development la akusekho ukubambisana sokunenhlelo zokuthi ukhokta ubeka imikhandlu phezu kwemikhandlu yendabuko. Kugobhoza igazi kwaphela abantu ebabananga. Kwaphalaza igazi kusukuncwatshwa kufa abantu abawu4 emncwabeni bebulalana. Isimo esibebuhlungu kakhulu sashiya abafelokazi abangaphezulu ka50 wasala imizi kwashimisa. Manje ke leso simo ke sisiphathe kanzima kakhulu ngangokuthi usihlalo wezihlalo bama traditional council basungula iexecutive ukuzama uhulumeni ukuthi kuxazululwe lesasimo sale yanto yombango okhona babananga. Babananga ke kunemikhandlo emibili ebevele lokhu kwathi qheke bekuhlalwa ngenhla kwemikhandlo ngenhla kuhlala emikhandlo kwaNobamba ngezansi edeni Dalton ngokubambisana ubuholi balaphana kwaNobamba ukuveza nina komkhulu. Lento ke isibe inkinga kakhulu ukhokta ke mayisebeka wabeka umkhandlu wagcoba umkhandlu okuprocessa ama development nama project wakhishelwa ngaphandle ubuholi obukhona obunomlando wamakhulu eminyaka ngaphandle. Nomama okhona laphana ubambele umntanake waphucwa amandla okuphatha. Inkantolo njengoba ngikhuluma kumanje nje yakwaNobamba ivaliwe sukela ngoFebruary yavalwa intsha yayivala yathi manje ayisazi lapho ukuthi intuthuko ayitholi intsha isithola ukuthi ukuze intsha sokunemikhandlo ewuthula mawuya kulomkhandlo ongapha awusamukeleki kulo ngapha intuthuko mayiza sekufika sukumbanga bahlehla abentuthuko. Sinenkinga ebabanango ehlula ukwenza lapha nama ikune trust esebenza kahle ngalokhu kwehlukana ukuthi sokunama site kunaleli site elibekwe ukhokta ngokuthi kuprocesseke izinto kunaleli site lobuholi obudala obabuvele bukhona emandulo eselithathela phucwa amandla la lahlelo eceleni sokunalento ke ukuthi ke manje kune divide yokulwa nokucabana. Lemkhandlu kosebenza kahle wakwayiqongwana lapha uphenduke manje indlela ukuthi uyahlukumezeka kade bekhethile nje manje lolu hlangothi olunye lwaphikisana nokhetho leyo process iyaqhubeka ngapha kwezobuholeni bomdabu ningibekezelele kancane udaba baze balanda ubaba uNsibande national uDr Nsibande iexecutive yasebabananga. Ubaba uNsibande wafika wathola ubiza imikhandlu yahlala phansi wathola ukuthi khona iphutha la leli phutha lilungisiwe. Leli phutha lingalungisiwe kune commissioner kaSikhakhane uNdunankulu osasuswa wayisayina i-commissioner nezincomo ngoAugust 2015 akaze ikhishwe lo mbiko namanje. Sinenkinga ebabanango ziningi izinkinga ebabanango ziningi zehlula ukwenza nathi lapha esikhona lapha eplazini lamafa overgrazing kunemphakathi efaka imfuyo eqhamuka wonke ama district kudestroyekile kuyaguguleka umhlaba. Siyacela ke isiphakamiso sami ngiyacela kini ukuthi isicelele ubaba uZokwana nobaba uCele phezulu ke basondele ke bazofaka indlela ukuthi kuvikelwe lo yamhlaba uvikelwe lo yamhlaba ngoba lo yamhlaba kumele ukhiqize lo yamhlaba ukhiqiza ulimi kwakunemfuyo kunenhlelo kahulumeni agri processing kufanele umphakathi uthuthuke intsha ayisebenzi. Siyacela lokho bese sicelela futhi ubaba uNsibande mayisekhona lapha kwaNdlunkulu abuye azoxazulula le yanto yakwakhokta abuye azoyixazulula ngoba uyithe Halamzi wayibona abayilungisi. Ndunankulu wesifundazwe lapha eoffice kaNdunankulu abakhipha umbiko nokhokta kaSikhakhane ukuze uxazululeke le yankinga. Leyo nto ngithi ngiyicele kakhulu ngoba kuningi ngabe ngiyakubeka ukuhlukumezeka kwasebabananga ngicela ukubonga kakhulu ngibonge nama-NGOs asilekelelayo kakhulukazi lapha e-University yase-Cape Town laba bebebizwa ne-Center for Law and Society abasisiza kakhulu ukululeka ngemithetho ukukhuthaza ukuqonda ngemithetho ngiyababonga kakhulu ukuthi abaqhubekele phambili.
Siyabonga kakhulu. Singa invite Edward Mpeko. And then Mr. Skala Beret. My biggest problem is the old people. The young ones won't take chances. So the least I can do is to stand up. Over to you. 5 minutes.
Ngiyabingelela the honorable visitors ezilanga phambili ngibingelele umphakathi wonke okhona namhlanje. Kezwakala kushubile. Mina igama ngu-Edward Mpeko engiqhamuka endaweni yaseMgababa eSouth Coast. Ngiwusomabhizinisi khona phansi kwenkosi uLuthuli eMathuleni. Njengoba sikhuluma namhlanje ukungibisa la ngempela engizibona kahle ukuthi ngeke ngikwazi ukuthola it's because of an organization or umbutho or ngathini inhlangano emele ezomhlaba la KwaZulu ITB ngonyama Trust Board. Engathanda ukuphakamisa ukuthi ngiveza ukuthi njengosomabhizinisi ngathanda ukuveza ukuthi lo mthetho lo ongamela ukusebenza kwengonyama Trust Board okuthiwa ingonyama Land Act ka-1994 ngabe wahlukumeza kanjani amabhizinisi ezindaweni zamakhosi. Okwesibili ngathanda ukuveza ukuthi ngikurecommende ukuthi ngabe singasebenzisana kanjani ukuthi lokho kuhlukumezeka kwamabhizinisi abantu ezindaweni zamakhosi sikwazi ukuvikela ngathini sikuxazulule or help it out ukuthi kungarepeateki. We don't have the same reputation yento that happened eMnini camp eMgababa. A brief story about Umnini camp. Umnini camp, I'm sure sonke sawazi la. Umnini camp udume kakhulu bekuyindawo evakashelwa amasonto, izikole, ngisho nje nama club okungcebeleka. Ngikhathi zokhisimusi. Bekuyindawo enhle kambi eyathuthukiswa ngale ndlela yokuthi yayisiyaziwa iningizimu Afrika yonke. eMgababa bekufika abantu abaqhamuka koLesotho, koSwazini, koGoli. Ekakhulukazi labo abebejabula kakhulu bekwabantu abakude nolwandle who can actually not access ulwandle. Ngokwenzeka kwezinto umnini akusekho njengoba ngimile nje. Umnini wa destroyeka ngenxa yama effects alomthetho we call ingonyama Land Act. Now lo mthetho sonke siyazi ukuthi lo mthetho was passed just before or on the eve of our democratic elections. And the reason ukuthi lo mthetho uphasiswe, it very much obvious. The reason ukuthi umhlaba ungaweli ezandleni of a newly elected or an incoming ANC-led government in 1994. Yebo, lo mthetho lo mumbi muhle kancane. Engozama ukugqamisa Why ngithi muhle kancane? Lo mthetho noma inhloso yawo kwaukuthi uvumbele umhlaba, especially kulezi ndawo sasizibiza ngama homeland, ukuthi uwele ezandleni zohulumeni omusha. Kodwa njengamanje masingawubhekisisa kahle lo mthetho udingwa ukuamendwa, udingwa ukuthi uamende ukwazi uaccommodate isimo samanje. One, njengoba lo mthetho awuphasiwe nje uvikela umhlaba osezandleni zamakhosi, kubalulekile ngoba vele umhlaba ubelonga kubantu, kubanikazi bawo okwamakhosi. Kodwa at the same time kulesi simo samanje lokho kuvikeleka, kuvikela kwawona lo mhlaba ukuthi uthathwe ongqowankulu laba sithi capital noma ilabo sithi ba rich bakwazi uba ne-access emhlabeni. Njengoba sibona ko Cape Town, qhamuka abantu baqhamuka ko Phesheya bayitapela imihlaba lapha ngoba benemali. Qhamuka ko Prince Edward lapha ko Britain bayitapela imihlaba. Ngaloko ke lo mthetho ngonyama Land Act muhle kancane, mumbi kakhulu. Ubuye ube mumbi kancane futhi lo mthetho lokuthiwa ngonyama kakhulunyana, sorry. Ubuye ube mumbi kakhulunyana lo mthetho lokuthiwa ngonyama Land Act. Ngoba ekunikezeni kwawo amakhosi kuyokuthiwa into oyinikeza ngenhloso ukuthi enze ubulungiswa with good intentions. Mayiwele ezandleni zomuntu ongena good intentions uba ingozi lo mthetho leyo. Njengamanje kunamakhosi ongathola ukuthi lo msebenzi intention yawo wakuvikela umhlaba uhlale esizweni. Kodwa ngenxa ukuthi uwele ezandleni ezibudedengu awusetshenziswa ngendlela lo mhlaba lo. Okwesibili kukhona inkinga ukuthi lo mandla anikezwe amakhosi yilo mhlaba awu abuse lo amandla lo amakhosi. Kukhona amakhosi corrupt, kukhona amakhosi arrogant angafuni ukutshelwa. Bandla hayi ngephuthe lawo kube khona amakhosi angafundile angazi lutho ngezombangazwe. Asisho njalo ngiya-eda kwezombangazwe. Ngakho ke lo mthetho lo uyingozi ngaleyo ndlela futhi. Ube ingozi futhi lo mthetho ngoba wonganyelwe ibhodi ekuthiwa i-ITB, ingonyama transport. Masibhekisisa kahle ingonyama transport safuna ke sibhekisise kahle. Ngoba uchairman wengonyama trust samasonke uMr Jerome Ngwenya. I'm sorry ukuthi uJerome Ngwenya, uJudge uNgwenya. But I'm sure mangimbiza ngoMr Ngwenya uzo accept lokho. For reasons be known to him and him. One, le body iPad as chairman. It is alleged ukuthi that board is being run as ifiefdom yakhe. Uyena ungqoshishilizi lapha. Uyena oshaya icathulo. Akuna objection lapha kuyena. His word is final. Le body lena, it is alleged. Le body le eyingonyama transport. Most of its members are handpicked. How? Not openly, but handpicked. Le body lena yakhe aphuma emaphepheni indaba yengonyama transport ukuthi one ithikabeza inqubekela phambili endaweni zasemakhaya. Ngiyakuvumela lokho. Ngiyivictim yaloko. Ibhizinisi alisekho emgababa, intuthuko ayisekho emgababa. Ingane zesikole asenandawo yokuya emaholideni ziqhamuka ku Newcastle, ziqhamuka ku Goli, asenayo indawo la zingafika zikhempe khona ziyolwandle. Ogreni bendawo kuneclub yomama lapha nabadala ogreni kusukela eLovu kuyofika emgababa abebehlala bedlala ibhola lapho mahala, bathola ilunch yabo mahala, babe nama-tournament mahala, babe no-Christmas lunch mahala, benikezwa umgababa. Ayisekho leyo nto leyo. I-youth alapha ayisakwazi manje ukuthola ithuba lokuthi ba-practice i-music, badlale zonke izinto, akwenzeki lokho. Umnini camp awusekho. Nama recommendation esingawacela phathi hlelo ukuthi kungavinjwa kani. Okubalekile kakhulu engicabanga ukuthi kwaziwa abantu ukuthi iNgonyama Trust isemkhankasweni manje yokuthi ikhokhisa abantu lento kuthiwa yi-lease. Mawakhile kuthiwa liza lomhlaba for 90 years. Sibuyela phe kwi-apartheid abakhuluma ngesikhathi se-apartheid abakhumbulayo. Oforum bethu obaba babehlala kuwona 99 year lease kuthiwa ngeke kube wakho lo forum uzohlala 99 years. Sonke sakwazi lokho. Manje iNgonyama Trust sibuyisela kulezo zinsuku lezo ze-apartheid. Ungaliza kanjani umhlaba endaweni yamakhosi ngo-90 years? Yona lo mali yelease iyakuphi? Ingena kusiphi isikhwama senkosi lo mali? Ngenza example la ngisuka khona enkosini uLuthuli. Ukusukela ngo-2007 kuya ku-2010 ngaphonsa imali engango-122,000 esikhwameni samathuli. 122,000. U-3,000 ngonyaka lo ngangofaka esikhwameni samathuli. Alikho nye business lake lafaka u-30,000 endaweni yenkosi ngonyaka. Umnini wakhe wayenza kunobufakazi baloko. Kodwa ibhizinisi lami iNgonyama Trust yalidestroya ngenxa ethi ngekweleta u-49,000. Yini u-49,000 compared kwimali engayifaka esikhwameni senkosi 122,000 plus no 2 million wa-investwa kwibhizinisi plus the job creation abantu babesebenza lapho. Alisekho lelo business manje. Ngizongixola kancane mse. Ngizama ukukhombisa ukuthi lo mthetho lo weNgonyama Trust Act indlela o-arrogant o-draconian ngayo udinga uku-amendwa drastically. Awudingeki uvimba intuthuko endaweni zamakhosi. So recommenda ukuthi futhi iNgonyama Trust ikhithe ukuphenywa kancane ngoba igcina imali zamakhosi, imali zabantu. Amabhuku eNgonyama Trust awavulekwe ascrutinizwe. Inkosi uLuthuli le ngaphansi kwayo mina yalimala ithole ukudutshulwa eMlazi. Inkosi uLuthuli yahamba yasiwa emshiyeni esibhedlela. Emshiyeni esibhedlela inkosi uLuthuli wayengeneme nakancane. Kwadingeka ukuthi inkosi uLuthuli aphuthunyiswe kwesinye isibhedlela. Kwacelwa iNgonyama Trust ukuthi ngasizeni bonithathe inkosi yethu la niyise endaweni ithizeni esibhedlela esinconywana. Ngonyama Trust yathini ayikho imali esikhwameni. Mina nginobufakazi bala ukuthi ngino 122,000 engadeposita isikhwameni samathuli. Yashona phi lo mali? Ngoba ngaze kubone intuthuko emzini inkosi ngaleso sikhathi. Aze ngibone kwakhiwa lutho lapha noma yecrashnyana ngemali iqhamuka kwiNgonyama Trust. Yashona phi lo mali? Abantu bakwaZulu funeka bayikwazi konke lokho ukusebenza kweNgonyama Trust ukuthi ngempela imali zabantu zishona kuphi izenzani. Ukuvala mphathi wehlelo. Emveni kokuba udaba lasemnini luvele emaphepheni ukuthi umnini udestroyiwe under instructions yeNgonyama Trust ukuthi kukhishwe umnikazi womnini camp. Okwenzeka ngaphandle kungekho emthethweni. Umninikazi womnini camp ubuyele khona manje. Manje kwathi emva kokuvela kwaloma report osomabhizinisi abaningi bangithinta ngocingo. Bathi wemnumzana awusitshele ukhiphe kanjani iNgonyama Trust wabuyela ngoba thina sadlelwa amabhizinisi ngala, sadlelwa amabhizinisi ngala, sadlelwa amabhizinisi ngala iNgonyama Trust ngendlela esingaboni ngayo. Wenze kanjani wena? Kokutholakala ukuthi ziningi izimali noma amabhizinisi adliwa iNgonyama Trust abantu abamnyama abakade bawavule endaweni zamakhosi iminyaka ingekabikho leNgonyama Trust. Kodwa namhlanje ifike bafuna ilizi babengafuna ukusayina ilizi idla amabhizinisi abo. Ngiyasola ukuthi bakhona abanye obusinessmen la abadlelwa amabhizinisi iNgonyama Trust. Ngaleyo ndlela siyafisa ukuthi le panel le ngakho ucabangisise kahle udaba leNgonyama Trust nawo lo mthetho ohambisana neNgonyama Trust ukuthi akuvuleke siscrutinize iNgonyama Trust iyenzani imali iappoint ubani iboard yakhona sifuna a yearly report njengabantu basemakhosini, and finally amakhosi akaziphathele i-trust yawo. Ayikho enye into edlula le suggesta kule report esisabishayo. And sorry. Ngiyacabanga mphathi wehlelo, that's all about it. And then thank you very much.
Siyabonga kakhulu baba. Sicela uMr. Zikhalia.
Mphathi wohlelo, izikhulu ezikhona la ubaba uKhalima Motlanthe nesigungu sakhe, umphathi wonkana ukhona la, ngezikhundla zawo ngiyakubingelela. Sebekhulumile abantu. Lensizwe ebila iqhekebule konke, kodwa ke mina kunento encane nje bengifuna ukuyingeza kulento eshiwe lensizwe. Ngizokhuluma ngomthetho wengonyama trust. Lo mina ngisuka ke ngiqale ngokuzisho ngiwakwazikhali sibonge igama ngibongani ngisakhamuzi eJozini ngaphansi kwesigungu komkhandlu wasemkhanya kude eJozini plot 16. Ngijabule kakhulu makhulunywa ngendaba yomkhanya kude ukuthi isifunda sethu esinothe kakhulu, kodwa nginokukhala ngoba emkhanya kude sinakho konke ongakuthanda nongenza yonke into oyifuna ukuyenza, kodwa ngenxa yomthetho wengonyama trust lo kukhulunywa ngawo, uthi umuntu uyabheka izinto uqala zingapha nangapha ugcine usuntuntane, usugcina ungasazi ukuthi uzokwenza njani. Babathi uqala zingapha ubone kunjani, thubuka ngapha ubone ugcina usuntuntane usufasekile ngoba uyasilimaza. Ngo-2012 sesafika nje sabizelwa ehhovisi lapha eJozini eTucson, kwathi asiphuthume namabhasi ethu. Masifika lapha ya safesa join ingonyama trust, singachazelwanga kahle nje, mina ngangachazelwanga nje nabantu abaningi abakhona ngakithi babengachazelwanga ukuthi silwane esinile ngonyama trust simi kanjani, sikusiza kuphi, uyabona. Sasayina ke ngoba phela sazi ukuthi ubuholi bethu masibizwa zinduna endaweni siyethemba. Nami nje ngingomunye wafana nempumpoto ngoba wawubona ukuthi umusu uthi uzobuza imibuzo ozokuthile kuyothi usuvukela umbuso ngoba umkhulu amaqiniso ukuthi uvukela umbuso, kodwa ngikwenzanga lokungathula nje ke ngathi angisayine ngoba abaningi basayina ngoba kuthiwa kusebenza ngeningi, ngasayina nami. Namhlanje sengithola iposi neposi ngizithola kuthiwa ngiyakweleta, ngithole izingcingo ezithi ngiyakweleta. Ngenhlanhla ke angikwazanga ukuyikhokhela ingonyama trust ukuthi ngiyajoyina kuyona ngoba kwabe sekuthi mase kuthiwa ibank angifaka imali kwi-account number kwase kuthiwa attention to bani kwabhala igama lomuntu. Ngase ngithi ayike mase kubhala ukuthi attention to bani ungasasho ingonyama trust, ngase ngiba nequery, ngase ngithi ngizake ngiyiphenye le ndaba. Ngahamba ke ngenhlanhla ngaya emahhovisi ayingonyama trust angaseduzane kwangakithi engeke ngiwasho, ngathola lonke ulwazi, ngabuya ngeza kwabasiphethe ngazochaza ukuthi nazi izinto zime kanje. Ngakithi ke sizohlela ke basibizele izikhulu zengonyama trust zosichazela ngebhada kwenzekanga. Ngike ngahlela emhlangano eminingi ukuthi mhlambe basenzele lento ukuze nomphakathi ngoba ngala ngakithi emakhaya ngiyajabula ukuthi bayishilo lento okuthiwa ubumpofu. Ukuthiwa isilwane kuthiwa ubumpofu esidalwa kungaqashwa njalo njalo. Sinamathuba ke thina ngale ngakithi sinomfulo omkhulu kabi okungathi mawusetshenziswa ngendlela efanelekile kudeleka amathuba amaningi emisebenzi. So kakwenzeki. So ke njengoba ngikhuluma nani nje kuyangihlukumeza impela okwengonyama trust njengoba lento izosuka la ikhuluma ngayo ingonyama trust impela nangomunye ohlukumezile ngikho ukuthi akumena ngedwa. Mhlambe uma ngingakhuluma nje kubaba umhlonisho Motlanthe, ngingacela mina ukuthi eke siphathele lo mphako ukuthi eke sibuzele lapha ya emahhovisi ayingonyama trust noma kwisigungu eseparliament ukuthi bayakubhekeleni lokhu ukuthi mabesula imithetho njengala ngakithi kwamhlabele njengoba sinhlophu kangaka nje kunabantu kunesibalo sabantu ingane eziningi eziphethe imizi emakhaya, okuyizona eziphethe imizi emakhaya zashonelwa abazali ngenxa lesi sifo lesi esikhona. Lezo ngane ukuthola okunye kungaka mhlawumbe uthola ukuthi kuzothiwa kusayinela ingonyama trust noma kuthiwe abazali beni bashona belokhaneni bejoyina ingoma yama-trust khona bekungayazi le nto le ngoba phela sitshelwanga kahle zake sichazele kwathiwa nje asayini wothola ukuthi after mhlawumbe ngoba bathi kimi na 40 years from 2012 kuze kuthiwe ngine-lease agreement ka-40 years. So-ke uma sengifile mina njengoba ngikhona nje uma sebefike ey'nganeni zami noma esizukulwaneni sami bethi umkhulu wakho noma ubaba wakho asayina i-lease agreement ka-40 years sewuyaphuma manje ngakhile nginendlu impela enkulu sakhile izindlu enkulu sasingazi phela kuyayingakafiki ngenye amatrust sakhile sinemizi. So uma sebefike bekhipha lezi ngane zami kuleya ndawo ziyothini asiphathisele lokho nje bacabangeleni ukuthi kunabantu ngempela abahlupheke njengalezi ngane zethu esishoyo ukuthi mangabe ngifa mina namhlanje isizukulwane sami sophelelaphi mase kuphele lo 40 years ukuthi angigalelwane plus le mali iyakhula ngonyaka 10%. Mina nje ngine ndawo yakalwayo yathi mayikalwa kwathiwa eyami u2000 after a year kwathiwa enye esezansi nginendawo ezimbili kwathiwa i1000. So le ndawo uma iqhathanisa ikhula ngo10% njalo ngonyaka. Yabona ayimile hayi ukuthi ukhokha manje ukuthi njengamanje ngazi ukuthi usela ngo2012 ngikweleta malini. So ke siyacela impela ke besibhekele ngoba ingoma yama-trust njengoba ishelo lethu esungana nabanye besibhekele ukuthi lesi silwane singasilimazi kakhulu bakwethu ngoba yonke into inobuhle nobubayo ngoba angazi ukuthi mangathiwa lapha angisuke ngayo kwakha kuphi ngoba lewa muzi engwakhe lapha ngachitha imali enkulu kabi ngwakha ngithi ukuthi uzabe ngisebenza iminyaka njengoba sengimbimbi nginjena nje ukuthi ngaphinde kuthiwa ngiyoqala phansi ngakhe enye indlu njengoba ngingaka ngoba kuthiwa angisuke lapha kuma ehlulela ukukhokhela ingoma yama-trust. So ke siyacela abathi nisibhekele ukuthi imithetho eniyiphasisayo phela babuMontante nibuke nakusemazingeni aphansi ukuthi ingabe inamthelela muni ngoba ekugcina kwesuku ngagcina sekusuka impi yesithathu yomhlaba mhlawumbe ngoba njengoba besha abanye bethi impi yomhlaba ayesithathu ayiqhathwa into enkulu yokuqhathwa into encane. Ilezi izinto kufanele nizibhekele phela masihleli ukuthi akusuka umlilo yini ngoba umlilo usuka nje ngento encane ehlungwini nje njengoba kuyihlungu nje umuthi nje kuvele kusuka umlilo okheleke kakhulu. So siyacela ke bakwethu nina ephathimandla enikhona lamane sibele ngokweqiniso njengake nje kwamhlabile ngani ukuba kuyangami bengiyothi le panel ake ifike phela ngoba sinesizwe esikhulu kabi ngapha ike iyeke ukuze emadolobheni ikambe lathi semakhaya ngoba emakhaya sihlukumezekile bakwethu. Mina nje okokuqala ngaqale ngaba nekhonza fee engayikhokhayo ngisho njalo uma usemakhaya indawo zamakhosi kunemali ekhokhayo uba 1000 uthola islip sekhonza fee. Okwesibili sekufika kwaba ingoma yama-trust. Okwesithathu manje sekhona itifiketi ezikhishwayo ke manje ukuthiwa zikhona uma unebhizinisi uzawukhokha ko2000 kuyaphezulu. Uyabona ukuthi le nje sidlela umdlalo emingaki manje emithathu endlini eyodwa. So ke anisibhekeleni ke bakwethu ngoba ningofakazi bethu ukuthi amathuba emsebenzi awekho ubupha bubhilitile ukuthi kuyokwenzekani ngokuzayo mhlawumbe eminyakeni emibili emithathu ezayo mabe kuqhubeka ngalesi simo ngoba nengoma yama-trust asiboni nokuthi sizuzane kuyona. Akekho sichazela ukuthi ingoma yama-trust isisiza ngalokhu nalokhu nalokhu. So ke ngiyacela ke mhlonishwa nesigungu sakho baMontante nike nisiphathele lo mphako ukuthi besibhekele thina kakhulukazi ngapha mhlawumbe ngoba izinto eziningi manizenza niyanithi nenza inhlolo lovunisho nize la emadolobheni kungithatha how many hours ukusuke le ngize la. So uma niye emakhaya kakhulu thina sinendawo lapha eJozini okuthiwa istadium saseJozini ungafika uhlale phezulu bahlala abantu bathi sichithishaye lapha noma bami ukhulube ngombhobho bekuzwe bonke abantu nje ngoba bekhona la. So siyacela ukuthi nizihambele kakhulu indawo zangakithi emakhaya kakhulukazi kwamhlaba yalingana siyakunxusa lokho. Umphathi wohlelo ngivale ngibonge ngaze ngibe sidingo.
Sibonge kakhulu babu Zikhali. May we please invite Mr. Danny Du Plessis. Welcome. Uzosithola isikhala. Okay. Now ngizokunote over to you 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, good morning to everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to be here this morning. My name is Dani du Plessis. I'm the manager of the TAU SA Eastern Region in Mpumalanga, and I'm also the National Restitution Coordinator of the Union and a member of the Garsibande District Land Reform Committee. The issues that were discussed here this morning are all very relevant to the situation. As an opening statement, I just want to say is that the land reform and restitution process is in a chaotic state, and it can be ascribed to several factors: lack of funding, lack of capacity in the department, and political decisions which can only be described as woefully inadequate. A huge backlog of claims are on the books of the department. In the case of Mpumalanga, 2,460, the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee instructed the department to settle these claims before July 2018. I can assure you it's not going to happen. It means just in Mpumalanga, about 100 claims a month must be processed up to July 2018. That is not going to happen. There is no capacity or funding to do that. Another issue which completely brought the process to a standstill was the decision to open the land claims in 2014. The intent was to speed up the process. The outcome was a total disaster, as we've seen. And this is going to impact on everyone involved in the process. For instance, what flowed out of the reopening of the land claims is the competing claims. The people of KZN know very well what the influence of competing claims on this process is going to be. What it means is that a person who has been a beneficiary of a restitution claim finds himself now in a position where there are 3 or 4 other claims on the property which he already received as a beneficiary. This is an impossible situation because the process is not going to meet the cut-off dates. It will go on and on. And the question must be asked, can the economy of this country bear that? I don't think so. And there should be a serious look from the legislature in Cape Town on the question of the reopening of the claims. I work with these processes every day, every week, and up to today, I could not find one paragraph in the Restitution Act of 1994 and the amendments since then which allows legally competing claims. And that is a serious worry. The Land Claims Court sat from the 19th to the 23rd of September to hear submissions on this issue. We are waiting their judgment with anticipation. Another question that was raised here is to alleviate poverty amongst farm dwellers, farm workers. Ladies and gentlemen, if we don't think in economic terms, we are not going to alleviate poverty amongst these people. We must also realize that land does not create to alleviating the plight of the poor, but what does is the utilization of land through sustainable agricultural practices. And this is what stimulates the economy and creates jobs. And we must always remember that. A lot was said here this morning about people that are jobless and all that, but very little was said on how to grow the economy, how to enlarge the economy, that all these people can be included in the economic process. I've prepared a submission for the hearings today. I will not be able to go through it in 5 minutes. I've handed in a document to the Secretariat which is available to be studied, in which I made 10 proposals to address the situation that we find ourselves in. And I must also tell you that what we've done in Mpumalanga is for the farm dwellers and the farm workers is to look for farms which is in government possession and place or deliver proposals to the department for these people to be placed on these farms where they can look after themselves and farm properly. You cannot farm on a farmer's property. In some of these instances, the farm dwellers have received 20 hectares, some of them have received 400 hectares, some of them have received 30 hectares. They are not going to better their position if they stay on a farmer's farm and only have 30 hectares available to farm. That is not the way to go. So we've made other plans, and in some of these instances we have already awarded land, and we've made decisions that was forwarded to the headquarters of the department for finalization. It is unfortunate that we must say that the land claims process is not going to be finalized in 2-3 years' time. We sit with a problem: what is going to happen after July 2019? Is this process now going to be put forward for another 5 years, 10 years? We are already 20 years in the process. And I would really, in the proposals I've made, ask Parliament and the legislature in some way to change the Restitution Act, to make the process, which is very cumbersome at the moment, to verify claims, to speed up that process, make it more simpler. Because at the moment it is not a straightforward process. It can take up to 5 years to verify one claim. And that is a problem. We cannot go on like this. If we look at the number of claims all over the country, we are going to deal with claims for the next 40 years. Some of the people present here will be deceased then. Some of the farmers will be deceased by then. So I really make a plea that we look at that. Mr. Chairman, I want to conclude with that. The document I've compiled is available, and I hope the members of the panel look at those proposals. Thank you very much.
May we please invite Mr. Glenn Farrett.
Thank you, Program Director. I'm representing the Association for Rural Advancements. AFRA, as it is known, was established in 1979 in order to combat and respond to evictions and dispossessions which were being carried out at that time. At this present time, in terms of the legislation that we are reviewing, we want to state quite simply that the laws that have been implemented have largely been unknown to people in rural areas. In as far as the laws have been put forward or put in place, they have often not been well resourced. In particular, we want to point out the Labour Tenants Act of 1996. Furthermore, legislation has not been effectively implemented, nor has legislation been regularly reviewed. AFRA as an organization works with farm dwellers, with farm workers, with labor tenants, especially youth and women, largely on commercial farms. We find that people's experiences reflect that legislation is not implemented effectively on the ground. The gap between what the intention is and what is actually received by potential beneficiaries is huge. We have to say that as AFRA, your presence and your process may have come too late for us. We have had to, since 2013, take the Department of Rural Development and Land Reform to the Land Claims Court to seek redress for the systemic and chronic failures expressed by the department, as we have already outlined, especially in regards to the labor tenants. We have found, by our own calculations, that if labor tenant claims are to be processed at the current rate, it would take another 50 years for the outstanding approximately 11,000 claims to be processed. This is an unacceptable situation. We have a department which calls itself the Department of Rural Development and Land Reform, but we would rather suggest that it be called the Department of Dysfunction. At every level and in every way, it callously disregards the rights of people. We have, through our court action, fortunately been able to uncover what we believe is the source of the systemic and chronic failure. It appears that the department has decided that it makes policy, regardless of the Constitution and regardless of law. It has argued this in the Land Claims Court, that there is a distinction in its mind between constitutional rights and constitutionally derived policy, and what it calls a discretionary policy. Policy at the discretion of the minister, policy at the discretion of the Director General, policy at the discretion of government, which overrides legislation, which overrides the Constitution. This is a shocking state of affairs, and we believe that in order to go forward, not only this panel, but Parliament needs to be empowered to intervene by regularly reviewing the performance of the department in relation to the targets and the outcomes that are defined in the legislation. We have gone further because we have no choice. And we have approached the Land Claims Court with a rather unusual request. We have asked for a special master to be appointed to take over the functioning of the department so that the objects of the law can actually be implemented. There is no evidence that the department as it currently stands and with its current views will actually make any progress. It is not unusual for those of us who are fighting for land, fighting for our rights, or let me rather say, it is unusual that those of us who are fighting for our land and fighting for our rights to agree with those who are owning land. But we agree with the previous speaker here that says, yes, it's going to take 40 years. At the current rate, it's going to take 50 years. There is something fundamentally wrong, and the problem does not derive from our parliamentarians. We need an intervention, and for that reason, we really request this panel to take seriously the court application that AFRA has brought at the Land Claims Court. But more than that, we want to remind you that these are people's lives. We have one claimant who is 102 years old. He is 102 years old. His claim is not disputed by anyone, yet his claim has not been processed since the cutoff date of 31st March 2001. That's 15 years for a 102-year-old man to wait for his claim. We implore you to stand with the people and ensure that legislation does trump the whims of politicians and bureaucrats. We need consistent application of the constitutional provisions. And we need instruments of review, and we need to ensure that stakeholders can effectively participate so that their lives are improved. I thank you.
Thank you very much. Please do share the notes with us so that on any of the issues that you might not have covered, we don't miss them. May I now invite Mr. Mark Lombard? Not here. Mr. Solomon? It has to be a Miss Solomon. The writers of my notes are setting me up.
Actually, Dr. Solomon, just to break the gender stereotype. Esteemed panel and colleagues, fellow citizens, thank you for this opportunity to exercise our democratic right to be heard, to be seen. My name is Monique Salomon, and I'm the National Coordinator of Chincha Amakaya, which is a national civil society alliance. I'm representing 10 NGOs across KwaZulu-Natal, Eastern Cape, Western Cape, Limpopo, and nationally. And we are working with rural women, youth, and men to connect struggles of farm workers, farm dwellers, smallholder farmers, fisher folk, people living on church land, land claimants. And my colleague from the Association for Rural Advancement has mentioned the law and the Constitution. And the Constitution says that we are all equal and the land belongs to those who work it. But 22 years into democracy, poverty and inequality are at an all-time high. We have heard these testimonies this morning. And the inequality is so extreme that we can see a wealthy couple going to an expensive restaurant, spending 5,000 rand for one meal, while around the corner, a mother who's destitute walks an extra kilometer to buy a loaf of bread that is cheaper. And we all know how expensive bread is these days. We've done research in 12 rural district municipalities that was published in 2012, and it shows that 1 in 3 households go hungry. We've also seen of those 2,000 rural households that 70% say they are farmers, but only 2% really earn income. And why is that? That is because the majority has 1 hectare or less to try and make a living. We see that small-scale farmers and food gardeners are struggling to access land, agriculture inputs, or access markets, as we heard this morning. Informal traders are treated like lepers. They make the streets dirty, they need to be chased away. And consumers who have money to spend, most of us don't, should have choice, but we don't, because most of the products on the supermarket shelf are made by a handful of corporations. In June 2013, when we were commemorating, not celebrating, 100 years after the Land Act, the 1913 Land Act, we traveled throughout the country to hear the testimonies of rural women and men, how 100 years after the Land Act, land dispossession continued to rule their lives. And we drafted a memorandum that we handed to the Land Claims Commissioner. And the silence ever since has been deafening. So we are really happy with this opportunity, and we congratulate the high-level panel for this initiative to allow us to once again reiterate our demands. The focus of our submission today is not going to be strongly on land reform, but our focus is on the need to prioritize small-scale sustainable agriculture for food sovereignty. And what is food sovereignty is that we control the food system, not the corporates. It must be in our hands. So I want to ask you a question. If large-scale, high external input industrial agriculture is the answer to national food security, if that is the answer, why then are 1 in 3 rural households going hungry? And we believe that we must decolonize our minds, that large-scale commercial industrial agriculture is the way, that large-scale commercial farmer is what we all need to strive for, because that is what a lot of people believe, and that's what the government has been promoted. And there are some initiatives that are trying to invest in small-scale food producers, but those are charity projects. And that needs to change. We say we must decolonize agriculture, forestry, and fisheries. And we need to support and truly invest in local, sustainable, and indigenous food production practices. So, if we really want to wage a war on poverty, as the government is saying, let the war rooms fight the real enemy, and that is the government's chosen path of economic growth that has widened the gap between the rich and the poor, the large landlords that have so much, and the landless that have nothing. So we are asking you, is there political will, really, to invest in rural economies that build rural, democratic governance, not kingdoms, and that really builds community cohesion, that promotes a local food system that produces affordable and healthy food, and that generates a range of livelihoods for rural women, youth, and men. And those are not farm worker jobs. Those are jobs, those are enterprises. So here are a few specific actions that we want to see in policies and programs. With regards to land, and there's a long list, but I'm just going to highlight a few. Farms need to be subdivided, and the legislation needs to change to facilitate this. As Reverend Mafuso said, the fact that there are farms now on our land, it's not our problem. Subdivide the land. 50% of redistributed land, we believe, must go to women. And we want a moratorium on conversion and development of agricultural land for elite developments. The game farms that we heard about this morning, the golf estates, the lifestyle estates, and we want a moratorium on mining and extractives. With regards to some pieces of legislation, the Spatial Planning and Land Use Management Bill has a promise of bottom-up local spatial planning, but it is choked by the weak municipalities that are struggling with capacity problems and qualified audits. With regards to water and other natural resources, the colleague from the KZN Chamber of Business mentioned the general authorization, the water licenses. It does not make sense to get the thousands of small-scale food producers to apply for a license, and we've heard how long that takes. That does not make sense. Regulate the large water users and punish those that violate those regulations, because that is where the water is going. With regards to the fisheries, recognize the customary fishing rights of fisher folk and implement the small-scale fisheries policy. Because with only the Marine Resources Protection Act in place, members of the Dwesa fishing community in the Eastern Cape continue to be arrested for poaching when they harvest fishing resources on a nature reserve that in 2000 was proclaimed their territory, their rightful, traditional, and ancestral territory. With regards to farm workers and farm dwellers, we are sad to say that the expected benefits of the relative rights of farm workers policy, the 50-50 policy, does not outweigh the threats that it has caused to farm workers. It has led to preemptive dismissals and evictions, as we have already seen under ESTA, and an increase in the use of labor brokers. The policy only benefits few farm workers with a long-standing service record, and thus discriminates against women, migrant workers, and undocumented persons who form the large majority of the casual labor force. With regards to agricultural support, take down the pedestal on which large-scale commercial industrial farmers are placed as high-end goal of what a real food producer should look like. Scrap the distinction between commercial farmers, emerging farmers, and subsistence farmers as a kind of gradual process of development to higher purpose. And rather invest in food producers who use sustainable farming methods that produce affordable, healthy food and protect the natural resources. We ask you to integrate the disparate policies for sustainable agriculture and community-based natural resource management into a coherent strategy that promotes a thriving and sustainable rural landscape. Practically, we ask that you finalize and implement the agroecology strategy of the Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries and clarify links with, for instance, the organic farming policy. We want you to invest, truly invest, in research, development, and extension for sustainable farming and agroecology, and make sure that those extension workers, if rural people get to see them, that they know how to promote sustainable practices. We want you to stop the Monsantos, the corporate monopolies of seed and breeds, and promote the protection of local and indigenous seeds and breeds. We want import taxes on agriculture products that compete with local products. We don't need those foreign hysterical chickens. We have our own, and we can be produced. You can see them walking around the rural homesteads. With regards to the local economy and local food value chains, we say support local production for local consumption, decrease the food miles. It doesn't need to come from far. Establish regulation measures that prevent monopoly and exploitation of producers by supermarkets. We've heard it this morning. 2 more points. Invest in and build on the strength of the informal economy and informal system, and regulate within the boundaries of what makes the informal sector thrive. Don't kill it. So, lastly, if we can close the bank accounts of a wealthy business family from India because of accusations of corruption and state capture, we can surely follow suit and mete out more severe punishments than a fine to large corporates like Pioneer, who engage in price fixing of bread and other staple foods for the poor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please do share the notes with us. I'm going to allow Ungosi Patisizwe Luthuli to be the last speaker in this round. Exactly at 1 o'clock we go for lunch. So that leaves 2.5 minutes. Someone will have to help me with the protocol of reminding Ungosi ukuthi 2 minutes seyiphelile.
Ngiyabonga mphathi wohlelo. Bengazi ukuthi ngizomala ngaphambili ngikhuluma. Ngicela ukubingelela itafula lonke. Amakhosi asendlunkulu, abantwana basendlunkulu. Bafowethu nodadewethu, bafundisi. Indawo engimi kuyona bengalindele ngizoma kuyo. Ngisagcizelela futhi. Nginguphathi isizwe wakaLuthuli. Muqhamuka ezantsi eningizimu neTheku. Kule ndawo le ekujayeleke ukuthi kusemnini. Thina sazi ukuthi kusemnini uMgababe Holiday Resort. Ngicela ukuthi mhlambe uma ngabe kukhona izinto ezithinta amakhosi. Mhlambe ke kufunwe indlela ukuthi kungakhulunywa kanjani ngezinto ezithinta amakhosi. Mhlambe kufunwe iplatform, kufunwe nalaba abathintekayo okukhulunywa ngabo babe khona kulowo mhlangano. Kukhona iphuzu la elingifudumezile ngaze ngasukuma elithinta isibhedlela elirong ngeke ngisalisho manje ngolisho ngalelo langa ngilungise kahle ngoba alilihle kahle asikho isibhedlela ayikho indoda yangikhokhela ngidutshuliwe eMlazi ayikho indoda ngayikhokhela mina imali yami. Ngicela ukuthi ke leli tafula leli lingaphambili uma ngabe lizokwazi ukulungisa indlela okufanele kukhulunywe ngayo izindaba ezithinta ezamakhosi emakhaya. Ngikajabula kakhulu ukuthi kufunwe ilanga ne platform. Ngiyabonga.
Siyabonga, ngicela senze kanje. Ngicela senze kanje. Ngicela senze kanje. At this stage, we have proceeded very well. The intention is not to suppress discussion. I think, as I requested earlier on, at this stage, let's invite a person who will make announcements about lunch. Ours is to listen, open the space for everyone to raise the issues. And so in that spirit, I would not want us to waste more time. I will humbly request that we invite someone to make an announcement about lunch so that exactly at 2 o'clock we are back here to continue where we left off. Is that acceptable? Thank you very much.
Sanbon. Umphakathi siyacela ukuthi ilunch isevwa la bese thole khona i-breakfast ngekathi sifike ekseni, so sibuyela khona lapho for i-lunch yethu. Ngo 2 o'clock sibese siyabuya futhi. Ngiyabonga. Members of the media, can you please remain behind? Members of the media, can you please remain behind?
TV News. My question is more or less related to my colleague here. Looking at our current budget, I stand to be corrected. 0.8% has been dedicated entirely to fees and education in this country. Do you think that free education and quality education is possible? And looking at our current budget, is it feasible? Thank you.
Mr. Mutlande and the panel, my name is Nati Olifante from Times Media. You've been to other provinces, but it seems in this province the most pertinent issue that gets people worked out, and get hotter than the collar, is the issue of the land, and all the amenities that go with it. What have you mostly found to be the most thorny issue or thorny legislation that people really argue about, or want to maybe vent out on? The issue of Ingonyama Trust, what can you say about it? They've given you history, which I'm sure you know where it comes from, but what could be the possible